2668, Private Kurt, J., en route to Celian Theater. As he sat in his chair, he listened to the rumblings and clamor of young men and women around him. It was a moderately sized leisure room, with ever-present gray metal walls and bright overhead lights that kept the halls and the room in perpetual daytime. As he turned from his seat and away from a digitally powered viewport, he saw what the commotion was all about. They were young and all dressed in similar attire to one another, sporting black tactical boots, gray and black camouflage trousers, and a black environmental undersuit they wore without the shirt. For some, it revealed little. For others, enough to let the mind fantasize. However, he did little to stare, as he then focused on whom the crowd gathered around. It was Moran and Spears engaged in ground combat. It was another facet of their culture, to test and gauge one another's skill and stamina in a contest of either grapple or fists. And among the lower enlisted, it was a community event. Since graduating, Moran had grown his mass to a decent size, with Spears as well, putting on muscle that made his opponent look small by comparison. The two were locked in their contest, with Spears having the edge over Moran, with his arms over his chest, restricting his arm movement, and forcibly spreading Moran's legs to deny stability. Spears had him struggling, and it could be seen by Moran's exhausted breathing and defeated form. In a last-ditch effort, Moran decided not to fight against his larger opponent, instead using the moment of driving his free right hand under his body and twisting his left side over onto Spears. This caught him off guard and landed the two on their backs, with Moran swatting away his opponent's arms and swiftly crawling under it into an armbar. He pulled and lifted his hips, causing a sharp pain for Spears as the motion was too quick for him to react. He felt a sudden pain and in the next moment, tapped out before he broke something. Defeated, Spears laid on his back, while Moran stood tall over his opponent, causing the crowd to holler at his victory. After the match, the two greeted each other with a handshake and laughter as the two coached one another on how either could have done better. As they cleared the arena, another pair was set up to compete, and another set of cheers rang out in the room. As he continued to watch, he saw a figured approach from his right with an extra drink in hand. It was Cameron. "Could have sworn Spears had that here," he replied as he offered a drink. "Yeah, it always surprises me how nimble that guy is," replied Jay as he took a sip of his drink. After their graduation, Jay and most of his platoon were immediately sent off on a military transport ship to the front lines. The trip totaled almost 6 months if they were going to reach their destination, but that's only because they had planned supplementary training prior to their first combat deployment. This was because even if they were fresh from boot camp and knowledgeable in a controlled environment, they still needed to get accustomed to dealing with raiders who have seen combat and to be trained by them. Today just happened to be one of those days, small unit tactics, a lesson that would take place in an onboard simulator. But first, they had to attend a class that was due to commence shortly. The door to their room had then opened, but it was unnoticed by the crowd until the individual spoke loud enough to silence the entire room. "Listen up," he said, garnering the attention of all who were present. "Start heading to the training classroom so we can get this brief over with. Take it seriously because your lives will depend on it." It was an older man than the rest, who stood at average height, but had a tired expression upon his face mixed with stern conviction. He wore the same clothing they did, including his blouse, which had a visible red tab across his shoulder and his rank stitched in the center. He was Sergeant Faith and his squad leader. "Aye, Sergeant," sounded his comrades as they began making their way to the classroom. They put on their blouses and departed, Jay and Cam included. The room they had left led into a hallway that had a long series of displays that revealed the black void littered to the brim with distant stars and gaseous clouds, forming dynamic backdrops. He was just glad they weren't near a star, or it may have blocked out the scene before him. "Think it's only classes, or are we actually going to do the sim?" asked Cam. "I heard it's both. No sense in not doing sim," replied Jay. "I heard they're working on updating it with enemy models here soon before we actually deploy. For now, it's apparently going to be set with pirates instead." They continued down the hall, following the other raiders through a door which led down a small hall and into a larger room filled with several rows of seats, enough for all the new blood. From what he could see, there wasn't a single person who held a rank higher than corporal that was participating. Seeing how most were fresh from the depot, and those who were at least a corporal had a white mark stitched on their shoulders, showing that they at least had time in service. Beyond that, they were all new, and this was their first briefing in the fleet. As all were present, Sergeant Faith stood at the forefront of the room, and before him was a large projector that was flush with the floor, and he walked across it with disregard as it was intended. "All right, listen up," he began. "I'll get through this quickly so that you have more time in the sim, because Lord knows you need more practical experience than you do death by holo presentation. Eyes up." He then stepped off the platform, and it came to life as soon as he did. He then spoke as a large figure unfamiliar to them was depicted, except Jay remembered what they looked like, even if it was a vague memory. "What you see here is our main enemy combatant, the Celian trooper. I'm sure you've seen some combat vids from raiders in the field, but here's what we know. Pay attention because there's more to them than you think," explained Faith. He pressed a button and the image changed to several more Celians, but with slightly varied changes in armor and vast changes in color palette. "Here's what we know. The Celian military can be categorized in two parts. You have your sailor, as seen here in clothes rather than armor, then the trooper, who are the only ones who wear armor, but they can further be divided into even more separate categories. But first, there are key differences between their sailors and troopers, namely in body size. From what has been declassified for official use, the sailors have a lower muscle mass compared to the troopers, so they're not really the ones you should worry about." He then showcased a sailor and trooper Celian side by side, showcasing the clear and distinct differences they shared, which were vastly different from how he thought of them. The troopers are a special case, as it's been researched that those trained for infantry combat will gain advanced growth of muscle mass and height. This is true for most troops who dedicate themselves to learning and perfecting the ways of ground combat. "Miran, what is a troop?" he asked, to which the raider in question stood up and replied. "It's their version of a unit, or command. While they sport the same armor as the General Army, they differentiate themselves by decorating their armor in the unit's colors and insignia," said Moran. "That's right. They separate themselves into troops, and that is where their loyalties lie, to their troop commander. But back to what I was saying earlier, Celian troopers will, on average, be larger than their weaker counterparts. We don't know how they are trained in CQC, but it's fair to assume they may have some degree of skill that can prove lethal. However, what we've seen so far says that they may not be well versed in hand-to-hand, but instead favor overwhelming their enemy with numbers alone. That's why you need to be effective in range combat and to be prepared for when they overrun your position. So for our time here, I encourage you to all practice and grow efficient in hand-to-hand. Who knows how many of you will have to use it." From there, Faith continued with a detail of Celian weapons, 3 of which have been recorded thus far, and moved on to how they have employed tactics thus far. From current vids and analysis thus far, they did little in the way of actively engaging their enemy, opting for holding a position until they had more soldiers than their enemy before they advanced. It was a constant they had seen, making it noteworthy for field teams to take advantage of. Faith continued, "Unfortunately, we don't have proper models of the enemy, so it won't be one-to-one. Instead, for tactics, you'll go against the worst, but only after we gradually increase the difficulty. Now, don your armor, we're hitting the sim. Have a fire team ready by the time you get there. You'll be going in 2 groups of 4 at a time," ordered Faith. The room then began to get louder from the sudden shuffling of occupants as they exited the classroom. From there, they headed towards the armory, where they stored their armor and were granted their weapon of choice. Each person was allowed 1 primary, a choice between the S8 and the S4, with each person receiving their standard sidearm, the S2. "What are you going to pick?" asked Cam as he placed himself beside Jay, who was finalizing his gear. "Might give the S4 a go since they authorized us to use it for the sim," he said, eyeing Cam and the auto rifle he chose. But as much as he liked the reliability of a well-maintained rifle, he had always wanted to try the Badger, as it was called. He would always see them in brochures and weapon shops, but they were usually out of his budget, so he generally disregarded them, for other, cheaper variants or brands. I'm telling you, Kaler knows how to make 'em, added Cam as he wielded the weapon to get a feel for it. It was sturdy in construction, and it was lightweight, a feature that was a must for any combat unit as it reduced overall fatigue. This was offset, however, by its heavier internals so that the user could maintain superior recoil control. Paired with their hydraulic recoil dampening system, it lessened the need for a full-stroke bolt carrier, reducing weight effectively. Overall, it was an amalgamation of superior recoil control and weight reduction, a time-honored commitment of the company. When he secured his upper chest armor, he went to the armorer and offered his identification, to which he was granted the badger and the sidearm at his request. He took it, along with his non-lethal ammunition, and looked over it in admiration. It was compact and light in his hands as he ran them through the weapon. Racking the bolt back and letting it fly forward was a must for most weapons, and the thudded clang of it locking in place was satisfying. Like the S8, it had a hydraulic recoil dampening system as well, but was a closed bolt with no need to eject a casing. It added to his silent nature, and he had dreams of using one. With that dream unfulfilled, he then placed his magazines into their respective pouches, and he and Cam were met at the entrance by two friendly faces. "Hey, you two, need a team?" The first to speak was the same man who had wrestled with Moran, Spears. "Yeah, we didn't exactly form a group on the way here, so this works out," replied Jay. When he accepted, the person beside Spears wrapped his arm around Jay in an endearing manner. His name printed on his name tape was labeled Fields. "That's the spirit. Come on, let's rock this practical," he said, but not before Spears spoke to calm his spirit. "We already told Sergeant Faith you two were our teammates, so we're going 6 next after the first group," said Spears. The arena-styled room they had entered was large, with the biggest area being the arena itself, with the seating arrangement taking even less space. Near a set of 8 doors that were raised above the floor, their sergeant stood, waiting for the rest of the raiders to attend. When most were present, Faith began. "This is your first time here at the sim, so I'm going to give you a rundown. Behind me are your sim pods. You'll get in, and it'll lower you to the arena's level, where you will begin your scenario. Now look below." He directed their attention to the arena itself, and saw that it was littered in a large array of squares and bland teal coloring. To monitor for physical fatigue, we're running live, not with a data sim. Each of you will be given one of 2 scenarios, each reflective of possible Sellian environments, urban and shipboard, added Faith. While he said there were only 2 scenarios, each instance would be randomly generated as soon as a group entered their pods. When he was done, the sergeant called for the first group. "Moran, Steele, your fire teams are first. Load up." They did as he ordered and situated themselves in a shell of a pad, fit only for the square hole it rose out from. It lowered the occupants, and the arena below them began to shift. The tiles rose well above their height until stopping in line with the floor the onlookers stood on. When it settled, Faith walked atop the arena as it was enclosed with thick, reinforced glass and began to speak. "Fire teams, are you ready?" Moran spoke, and his voice was carried through a series of speakers, as did the others. "Ready." "Good. Your scenario is generated, and your enemy projections have occupied the space. Neutralize the enemy, then return to your pods for extraction." "When you're ready, exit your pods and begin," said the sergeant. As he said, the doors of their pods opened, and a crowd began to gather at the corners of the arena and look below. The 1 teal tiles were now colored and seamlessly depicted that of alien-styled architecture. The form of the tiles were relatively short in their width, reflective of a ship's interior. The group moved clumsily as 2 separate entities as they began clearing through the interior. The 2 teams populated 2 different sides of the ship as they began encountering their Sellian stand-ins, pirate models. They were crudely dressed with out-of-date gear and shoddily made repairs, but they seemed fearsome to say the least. They were made with hard light projection, a technology made several years ago, and recently made available to the military. It offered the most realistic environment to train without having human opposition. The technology was still new, and most present had never even heard of it, Exasperated oohs and ahs were sounded as the enemy popped into existence and began populating the rooms Miran and Steele had yet to clear. As they moved through their rooms, they started off stumbling past one another, but slowly as time went on, their movements began to slowly attune to each other, with Miran taking the lead. "Watch your corners. Brett, get those doors," he ordered. "Ready? Go, go, breach," he replied, and opened a section of the wall that was depicted as a door, and the tiles lowered, revealing the room and their adversary. Jay figured it had cost them a fortune to implement this tech into a military transport ship of all things. However, it was said that this version was a last-generation model, with a newer version implemented at their destination, an assault-class carrier owned by the ODR, the TRSC arm of Sol. He watched as the two groups made their way through the halls, shooting at the enemy with simunition rounds and watching as the hard-light hologram He could tell that it was indeed last-generation tech with even later software, and as he noticed minor glitches in the program, but it did its job nonetheless. Miran continued, as did Steele, though their relatively short collection of rooms before coming to an end. Like before, each leader gave their orders and breached through their doors and into a large central area. Cover was plentiful and spaced evenly through the final area, as the two teams took to the closest cover to them, and concentrated fire from the pirate programs began firing into them. Everyone watched with a deep focus, wondering how both were going to pass their practicals, but Jay was confident Miran would come up with a solution. Cam thought the same, as did Spears and Fields. "That's a lot of firepower. Look, the pirates are about to flank," noted Cameron, directing the three's attention to the left and right of the group. It was standard tactics to first overwhelm the enemy with volume of fire, then with a smaller group, move to the flank. It was an old tactic, but it worked more times than he could count. This was due to the reason that their suppressive fire could be anything. Tanks, machine guns, hell, even rockets could work to suppress the enemy. For Miran, it was a test that he could prove himself, and everyone who knew him believed he could do it, and he did. Miran turned to his team and spoke to words nearly inaudible to the onlookers, but yelled over to Steele his plan. "Crossfire, my left, your right," he ordered. Steele looked over and noticed with his angle an advancing enemy closing in on Miran and took aim to fire. Miran did the same and began firing into each other's flanks, effectively ceasing the enemy advance. Meanwhile, those who didn't support their flanks fired towards the rear of the arena where the concentration of fire originated, causing the overwhelming fire to lessen as the pirates were programmed to simulate reacting to oncoming fire. This allowed Miran and Steele to advance in a dead sprint, tossing their reserves of sim grenades behind enemy cover in addition. With each explosion, the enemy lessened until the two were on top of the enemy position. Behind their cover, the pirates cowered, not noticing the presence of the two, who, without feeling any remorse, fired into the projected training simulations, causing a buzzer to sound the end of their practice. Cheers were heard from the onlookers, and when the two teams returned, were greeted with praise from their comrades. "You guys did awesome. Can't wait to run it myself," said one. "That teamwork was pristine," sounded another, meeting Miran with a clasp of their palms and bumped shoulders. As they began to settle, Faith called for the next group. "Spears, Despa, gather your fire teams and get in your pods." They acknowledged his order, and the 8 convened with their teams and into their respective pods. It was bare bones compared to the real thing, but it did its job in its seating arrangement. Jay kept his rifle across his chest, with the sling keeping it close as he settled into the seat. When he was situated, the doors closed and began to lower to the level of the arena. It was dark, and the only light present was what filtered through the glass of the pod door. After passing through a small section of darkness, he was revealed once again, and he was able to peek out into the arena. The walls depicted the outer walls of buildings, and the ground was like that of grass and pavement. It was an urban scenario, and several raised pylons were raised to an extent to resemble abandoned vehicles. His heart had begun to race, not out of anxiety or fear, but of pure adrenaline. He knew it all to be for training purposes, but it was one more step to being someone who could fight for those who couldn't defend themselves. He had since left the person he was before and sought to become a version that could right the wrongs he wasn't fast enough to prevent, and he hated himself for it. This practical was another test for him to overcome, but this time he had others to count on. And as he thought about this, a call came to his helmet from their sergeant. "Spears, Despa, you guys ready?" he asked, to which they responded in a hearty rah, followed by those in their respective teams. The doors for them opened with a taxing whir, and when they opened, they were met with the entirety of their scenario. Just as he saw from his windows, it was reminiscent of an urban environment. Walls of buildings and abandoned cars littered their view, and when he was met with no resistance, he looked above and found that instead of glass, the likeness of a sky was depicted above them. If not for the random flat edges, he would have thought he was in another world, or transported to one digitally. Jay then readied his rifle for the trial before him as Spears began to give their orders. "All right, let's move up. Jay, Cam, get ready to breach that door to the left, Fields. Watch the road," he ordered. Spears then looked towards Despa and his group, who decided to breach their building altogether, leaving only Fields to man the road. "Blasted tool. Fields, set up on that car while we secure our building," he said. Their arena was set up similar to Moran's, with a set of rooms on the sides of the arena. Instead of being closed off from each other until the end, there was an entire road at which the enemy could traverse. Faith noticed this as he stood above and watched as they moved through their area. Despa's team had completely disregarded the road and went straight for the building, which in Faith's eyes could have led to their doom if not for Spears and his thinking. It was common sense for most leaders, and he was ashamed such a simple tactic was overlooked. He knew he was going to have to rectify this later. As Jay, Cameron, and Spears entered through the door, they flowed as a rough river, with their movements lacking finesse and practice. But they were effective in their shot placement, as pirates would move to meet them, and Jay would neutralize them as they rounded a corner. Cam offered fire support when Jay would reload, and would move up after doing so. It was still imperfect, but Faith could sense that they trusted each other greatly, and as they proceeded, their movements began to smoothen out for the remainder of the time until they reached near the end of the building. However, besides them in the road, Fields fought for his life. "Spears, Jay, guys, we got pirates, center field," he announced over comms as he fired his rifle at the moderately paced pirate horde. "Jay, Cam, move it. Fields got pirates. Move to flank," he ordered. The three advanced at a faster pace while still trying to maintain effective awareness as they breached the final door that led them out of their building. With his muzzle raised, Cam opened the door while Jay cleared their exit by circling it in a wide arc. When there were no threats present, he and Cam moved to the road to meet the pirates, with Spears watching their rear flanks. The horde was beginning to slow, but their numbers still overwhelmed Fields. Cam began firing from the corner of their building, while Jay moved behind a vehicle that he used for cover to manage the left flank. Quickly, they reduced the numbers to a handful, then eventually nothing. Fields was the only one who stood opposite of Jay and Cam, rejoicing. "Hell yeah! I thought I was going to get zapped if not for you two." "By the way, where's Despa and his crew?" commented Fields. Noting their absence, they collectively looked at the set of buildings his team went through and assumed the worst. The door had opened, and 3 out of the 4 exited, with 2 of them holding on to one person who seemed unconscious. With a buzz, the arena began to shift to its blank state, and Faith spoke to them on their success. "Good work, Spears. Your direction just saved the rest of you. Despa, talk to me after," he said as they walked to their extraction. To Jay, it seemed short, but in reality, 25 minutes had lapsed, when he thought it had been just 10. As they left, other teams took their place in the arena, with some failing and others succeeding. It was necessary for their training, and they would undergo it for their time and space until they reached their destination. Their day ended, with their team making several more rounds through the arena, with Faith even sanctioning a 4 versus 4 near the end, and the highlight of their day. 6 months have passed since boarding their transport vessel, which also acted as a mobile field environment. It suited their needs sufficiently with the training instilled in them by their superiors. It had just been after their most recent scenario in the arena that Jay and his fire team were on their break after going against another team of fledgling raiders. "Talk about a close one," said Fields as he removed his helmet and began chugging water from his canteen. Cameron added to his comment and did the same. "You think they're upset?" The two looked across from them on another set of benches of the team they had gone against. They were worn and tired, with visible beads of sweat dampening their hair with their helmets removed. Their heads were hung low, and their defeat was obvious. "Despa's a decent leader, but he likes to get ahead of himself," added Spears. He took a drink and stood before the three, with Jay sitting quietly as he read from a data pad. "What you reading?" he asked. Jay looked up to the three who turned to him as he answered, "A missing person's form. Sent it before we shipped off, and they finally got back to me," he said in a solemn tone. "A missing person request? For who?" added Cameron, taking a moment to peer at the device. Jay was unbothered by his peering and turned it for both Cameron and Fields to have a better look. "Alexandria Farron," he said, reeling the pad back to himself. The three were confused at first, seeing how it was their first time hearing the mention of a woman, thinking it to be his friend or perhaps his lover. "Alexandria? How'd she go missing?" asked Fields, who was then followed by Cameron. "Who is she?" added Cameron, but saw Jay's expression lower. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" He tried to retract his question, but Jay shook his head, knowing their intentions were pure and innocent. "She was my co-pilot's, my brother's, fiancé. We were headed to Dema on a data run when we were attacked by Celian ships. We didn't know at the time, so we thought they were pirates and tried to flee to TRSC space. We made it to Draxus, but that got hit before we could alert the nearest TRSC fleet. Next thing we knew, we jumped the edge of the sector and thought we were clear, but a single ship knocked us. I scuttled it, but Cam was killed by shrapnel." For the three, it seemed like a lot of information for what seemed like an innocent question, but Spears saw that it weighed heavily on Jay. He placed a shoulder on his comrade, but Jay shed no tears, as much as he wanted to. He felt hollow, having survived so far, but he continued. "I only learned after the fact that after we made our run, he would introduce me to Alex. She lived on Dema, and that was going to be his last run for a while, because she was going to have twins. Results came back, though, inconclusive. The rest could see that her fate and that of her children ate at him, and it had just now begun to surface. Seeing how well he fought in light of his emotional distress, Spears was still confident in his ability to fight, but offered words of reassurance, not as his team leader, but as a friend. I'm sure that once this war's over, we'll be able to find her. We already have their Navy packing, so once we drop and win this thing, I'm sure we'll have more to work with," said Spears. Cameron then chimed in to raise Jay's morale even further. "That's right. I'm sure plenty of the advanced teams might have some intel of where they took them." Fields then added words of his own. "I hear a squad from Raptor Company is already on the planet. They're just waiting for the moment to strike." Jay appreciated their sentiment and placed the pad in a pouch designed for it. He returned a smile to the group as reassurance that he was fine. They were skeptical at first, but took to his words in confidence as their day came to a close with a final briefing. It was one they were expecting for their time in space, since their travel was artificially increased to allow for further training. It was, however, going to be their first largest mission straight from the depot, and it was common knowledge that in the current era, that didn't happen commonly. Even during their latest conflict some 3 to 4 years ago, with the end of the militia piracy revolution. As Jay knew it, and as he was taught during his recruit training, the MPR conflict began on the other side of TRSC space from where he was now, in an outer colony called Castus. In the end, the conflict was won by none other than the 4th ODR Battalion. He had some expectations to live up to, and he was determined to do so. 2668, Private Kurt J., en route to Celian Theater. After a brief reprieve after training, they, along with the entirety of fresh-blooded recruits, were gathered in a large atrium. It was similar in construction to the smaller classroom and designed for larger crowds. When they found their seats, the rest required to attend filled the room until every seat was occupied. Seeing the room mostly filled, Sergeant Faith then stood at a podium, off-center of the main projector, and began his briefing. The room darkened, and only the glow from the hollow projector could be seen until ultimately coming to life with graphics of their intended targets and ships that orbited an unfamiliar planet, Celia, as well as the rest of the system. As you all know, we are currently at war, and the time to face our enemy is near. Already on the front lines, the Navy has engaged the enemy and pushed them back to their planet. They are prepared to fight tooth and nail for its security, but that is where we come in. The scene changed to a collection of ships of Terran design battling in the outer planets of the system. Right now, we engage them on their outer planets, namely Belladere and Dorn. From there, they plan to wait and sweep for enemy contacts in the Tila asteroid belt. From there, we will link up with our home base, the TRSC arm of Sol, and where you will each report to your respective commands. Now, he said before switching the view to the planet of concern. All you need to know is that our plan is to take the capital city, Artre, and assist with Raptor Company in their mission to capture the Celian command. Be prepared for a hot drop, because the area is sure to be swarming with enemy contacts to the north and the east. That is where we'll insert and raise hell for them to advance. The mission description seems watered down, but Jay knew it was only to give them a broad idea of what they were going to get into, with the details to be delivered when they were actually with their commands. The rest of the briefing went as usual, regurgitating enemy organizations and structure, something he was now fairly familiar with. He knew the enemy to be donned in black and gray armor, much like them, but had amber-colored visors. The overall shape of the armor was different, and the sashes they wore added to their design. He did well to study up on them. As their likeness grew, the more he remembered seeing them early at the start of the war. He was just ignorant of them until now, but he was going to have his chance at retribution. After the briefing, Jay, Cameron, Fields, and Spears met for their final meal aboard the transport ship. It was to be their final reprieve of normalcy before their encounter with the enemy. "Say, what should we call him?" sounded Fields, and he took a large bite out of his poorly made and plain-tasting food. "I heard some of the guys who are supplementing Viper came up with a name for him." "Oh?" Cameron perked up to the query. "Besides Celen, I don't know anything that you'd call them that can be derogatory." Fields waved his fork to the sides in a snide motion, denying Cam's rebuke. "You saw the holograms. With their helmet off, they got those long ears, see? Well, I think we should start calling them knife ears," he said confidently. Cameron was the first to begin, but was interjected by Spears, who sat quietly until now. "It's stupid. There's no need to attach a name to them. If it makes you feel better, go ahead," Spears replied, as he returned to his food and began reading off his personal data pad and going over fire team formations and tactics, ignoring Fields, who then turned to Jay for his input. "What did you say, Jay?" "I think it's fitting," he said confidently, confident that Jay would agree. "It doesn't roll off the tongue. Come up with something better next time," he replied, earning a gaze from Cam. "What? I just said it doesn't roll off the tongue. Besides, it doesn't matter what we call them, just as long as we win this war." It had already been a year and a half since their first encounter with the Celians, and they had already pushed far into their territory, capturing several planets and leaving it to the orbital guard and troopers to garrison them. "All right, fine. I won't force you guys to use it, but I'm sure it'll ring when we finally drop," said Fields, who garnered a distant "hell yeah" from a raider a couple of tables away. They were in compliance with their mission, and Jay dwelled on the subject silently as their surroundings grew loud with the addition of the new slang. Now finished with his food, Jay departed, with Cam behind him. Instead of going to bed, he left for his usual seat in their room that gave him a view of space. Instead of stars and nebulas, only a familiar swirl enveloped the ship. They were in slip space and en route to their destination, Celia. He was quiet for the most part, and Cameron sat quiet as he began to read. When some time had passed, Cameron spoke to a listless Jay, who only stared into the portal. "Do you think we're ready? For war?" Jay turned to Cameron, who had a look of fear and anxiousness upon him. He replied to comfort his friend. "No one's really ready until it happens. You just have to get ready to adapt. I know I did, he said. He thought of the words himself, speaking them from experience. When he looked at his brother in arms before him, he finally remembered that he was older, by nearly 5 years or so. But due to their rank, he saw a young man who was fresh out of academy that was now his peer. In the end, he didn't see age, but rank. It came as a shock to him when he first learned that Sergeant Faith was his own age, with a blood stripe of his own with the experience to match. It was jarring that raiders younger than him have seen combat before he had even thought to join. But he saw that they wallowed in it. To be a raider was a lifestyle, and few thought of leaving the organization, for they believed that only torment would await them. He had heard stories of raiders who decided to come home after a large operation, but it wouldn't last long with reports of them taking their lives shortly after leaving the service. But that was their risk as part of the TRSC. They would leave families behind for months, or even years at a time, hardly growing old because of cryogenics. Those who returned would sometimes come home to nothing, or their partners had moved on. It was a grim reality, but that was the life they lived. As such, it became common for relationships to form with service members aboard a vessel, with marital policies still in effect to punish infidelity. Having lived it for a short while, it was a culture shock, to say the least. "Hey, Cam," he said quietly. "Do you have anyone back home? A girl? A boy?" Cameron grew flustered at the sudden questioning, since Jay's mind had wandered onto the subject, knowing that this might be his life from now on. In the end, it was curiosity that drove the question. "I did during my time in academy." He laid his reading material on the table in between them and stared into slip space with Jay. "But when she learned I wanted to join the Raiders, well, she broke up with me, wanted me by her side, and asked her father if I could get a job at his work." "Oh? What did he do?" questioned Jay, his interest piqued. "He owned a small ship manufacturer startup. Bravo Systems, he called it. They made B-grade ship components. You heard of it?" replied Cameron. Jay shook his head in the negative. "First I'm hearing of it, and I dealt with plenty of component manufacturers in my day," replied Jay. Cameron was curious and probed the subject further. "I remember you saying you flew. What did you do before all this?" Jay hesitated a moment, but answered honestly. "I used to be a data runner for a small broker. Started in the middle of the pirate revolution, but I ran independent, learned to steer clear of the MPR and TRSC alike. But that's all I did since I was old enough to fly. From Alistair Nebula to Alpha Centauri, I ran it all until now." He paused, turning to Cameron, who listened intently. "I used to fly the Herald, a last-gen craft, with even later-gen components. It was a miracle I survived in the first place." Cameron then spoke, this time posing a question. "Do you think you'll fly again? It seems like a waste of a skill, if you ask me." Jay was caught off guard by the question, but knew deep down that he still loved to fly. He just felt like he wasn't worthy of it. "I don't think I can. Not yet, anyway. After losing Tom, it's been a sour experience to remember. But we'll see." He ended before rising from his seat in preparation for bed. He knew that by the time they wake up, they would need their gear in order for their transfer, so he found it best to prepare himself for what is to come next. "Well, in any case, let's go to bed. Got lots to get ready for. Good night," he said as he left for the showers, then finally to his rack. It took little for him to fall asleep, and in his next breath, he was asleep, and only the calamity of the ship would wake him. When he awoke, it was to the silent clamor of shuffling from the other raiders, as they grabbed their gear and moved to the compartment that connected to a docking collar. They had all lined up in rows as dictated by their sergeant. "Hurry and form up. We have places to be and aliens to kill. Don't leave shit in your racks because that shit will be lost, and you won't be able to get it back," he ordered, which caused several others to return for items they may have thought they forgot, making their trips more than it needed to. Jay figured it was due to their rising anxiety of their moment to come. The doors opened, revealing a short hall that was quiet, with the other end open and ready for their reception. Column by column, the fledgling raiders filtered into the collar and entered into the ship opposite of them. Jay walked with his gear, followed by Cam and Fields, with spears leading from the front, and noticed that the corridor was viewless, and reinforced with insulation and alloy beams. But as they arrived through the docking tube, they were met by a group of 3 individuals, donned in standard raider armor, but were painted with gold. He was an older man, but was still in the height of his prime, and the letters spelled out below his neck were Raikou, with the individual to his left named Jakal, and the person to his right, Chandler. He knew little of them, but knew by their stripes that they led the companies of which they were to be assigned. So to make things easier, they were put in formation and called out by name. "Wasn't there supposed to be 4 company commanders?" whispered Cameron to Jay, who could only reply with a shrug, stating that he didn't know. Instead, a female appeared beside the 3 officers, sporting only red strips upon her shoulders and knee guards. From her angle, he couldn't make out her name, but did overhear her speaking with Raikou. "Is that so, Eau Claire?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Raptor is full and is on standby for the second phase. We can't risk trying to teach a rookie in that kind of field. I take it Cobra has the room, correct?" she explained. "We have plenty, more so than Viper and Raven combined, I suppose," he replied. "Don't worry, with our numbers, I'm sure we'll be able to nurture a fine batch of bloodied raiders yet." She offered a slight bow before departing when he saw her helmet's visor. Of the 3, they had decorated on their central chest plate with an engraving of their respective company namesakes on the left side of the armor. However, she didn't have one, and instead had noticeable scratches on her visor that created a sinister decor. One with rows of teeth lining the edges of the visor, with a pair of sharp eyes in the center, surrounded by more scratches that created an inversion of empty space. By the time she was gone, there was a large pool of recruits who had yet to be put into either Viper or Raven Company, with their respective commanders at the forefront of their new rookies. This had left them with only one option, and the older officer addressed the masses. "All right, listen up and listen well," he said as he began pacing between the 3 groups. "I am Major Raikou, Company Commander of Cobra Company, and current battalion commander until we find a replacement. A little bit about me, whom you will be led under. I was born and raised on Alpha Centauri Prime, where I enlisted. Then after some years of service, I was commissioned, prior to the start of the militia pirate revolution. So I have seen it all the worst humanity can do to each other, as well as a lot of the good. And it is my belief that we all have a divine right to live among the stars. But we have been attacked by forces unknown, and who have the misfortune of being your enemy." He looked about the fresh blood who had just transferred from the transport ship that had already left, and continued. "For those of you uninformed, we have been attacked by our first contact race who call themselves Celians, and instead of a friendly greeting from the stars, their brass decided it was a wonderful idea to invade our newest colonies, from Dema to Draxus, and all in between. Those who were not killed were taken as cargo and may be facing a fate worse than death. We have the intel that most civilian populations have evacuated, and those left are hostile forces. And yes, before you say it, no, we are soldiers, not monsters. We are still citizens of the TRSC, and we will not stoop to their level. For the lot of you, this will be your first combat engagement, one worthy of earning your blood stripes. But you must first prove you are worthy. Now get to your racks after convening with your commanders. Dismissed." Jay had felt sincerity and passion in Raikou's address, and did as he said, convening with the major in the center. He thought it was just another speech, but tailored to those he would lead directly. Instead, he was taking the time to learn the names and interests of his new subordinates. When he approached, he met Raikou's eyes with his own, and knew he was about to speak with a major. "Kurt, is it? I've heard a lot about you. To think the pilot who warned of the attack would join the raiders. I would have thought you would join the Flyboys, since you share similar talents." As per custom and courtesies, he placed himself at parade rest before replying, "Yes, sir, but I felt I could get close and personal with the enemy, sir." "Well, you chose right, since we'll be dropping into the heart of enemy territory. I'm sure you'll get yours, but make sure you keep a level head when in combat. You understand?" replied Raikou. "Yes, sir," replied Jay as he now searched for a new topic, such as the visual intrigued from just moments prior. "Sir, I have a question." "Shoot," he replied in earnest. "That sergeant from before. I noticed she doesn't share an engraving like the other companies do, and I noticed how her visor was designed. Is that legal? The major had a countenance of wonder upon his face, indicating that the subject had not yet crossed his mind, and shared a look of familiarity. Only few people are authorized to have marked helmets like those. Sergeant O'Clair is just one of the very few. Take note, those with that kind of modification are reserved for the most dangerous and experienced. And know that if they lead the charge, you charge alongside them. Jay gave a nod of understanding, knowing that his answer was left unfulfilled, but had decided not to pry. When they were done with introductions, they moved into their new homes, separated by company, and found that Cobra had the largest space of the four. Luckily, he was able to find beds that shared a space with Spears, Cam, and Fields, who were already engaged in conversation by the time he had arrived. So what do you think these freaks look like? You think they take the form of a human before eating your brains? Fields, the first voice he recognized, and noticed the disappointed looks of Spears and Cameron. First off, we already know what they look like. And second, do you not pay attention to the briefs? It was Cam who had replied, blatantly berating Fields' speculation. Hey, I'm just saying, but maybe it's not their real form, he rebuked, clearly trying to add ground to a baseless claim. Spears sighed and replied, Fields, you fool. We have the biometrics, but if you're still curious, get a kill of your own and find out then. In the meantime, pipe down and finish putting your gear in your locker. By the time he had finished reprimanding Fields, he, along with Cam, had noticed Jay's presence as he began putting his items away with Cam, and Spears relaxing on their beds while they waited for the two to finish. I saved you a rack below me. I hope you don't mind the bottom, sounded Cam as he leaned over from the frame of his bed, nearly meeting Jay's face. He momentarily grew flustered from how close he was, but quickly got used to it since it had seemed to be a habit of his. It's fine, and move your face before you kiss a locker door, he said with a smirk, before turning to a more serious topic. So, you guys ready for our first drop? He said nonchalantly. You never know you're ready until you're in combat, answered Spears. I suggest you all get in the right mindset, especially you, Cam. The person in question shrunk behind the cover of his rack's frame, reminding Jay of what he looks like. You know what you remind me of, Cam? He asked, to which he shook his head in a sulking fashion. Like a cat, the ones with the long fur. Surprises me how lenient they are with hair. Right? Voiced Fields erratically. I just got approved for a low-cut mohawk. Pretty sweet, right? His comment had caught them off guard, ultimately surprised at his supposed authorization. But he had shown them the paperwork which appeared legitimate. Damn, he's right, said Spears. Congrats, I guess. Fields had a look of triumph over his peers, but they were quick to dismiss his upcoming new look. They would then continue until their rest period had come, with a simple order to make it on time to the briefing auditorium center of the ship. They were within the final stretch of their first journey into the expanse of the stars. Andai. 20X69 Private Kurt J. within Celian Theater. After entering the auditorium, or rather, the largest briefing room he had ever seen, and took a seat with his squad. Among the countless others, the area was filled with more than just rookies. There were plenty who donned white markings on their armor, with an even smaller subset having donned red stripes upon their armor. All companies were then separated into their respective sections, with Cobra taking up most of the rear, with Raven and Viper taking up the sides. Across from him, he saw another group of raiders that were shallow in numbers compared to either Viper or Raven, but held the most blood stripes of any company present. It was Raptor Company. There wasn't a fresh-bodied rookie present, confirming the earlier notion by Sergeant O'Clair that they couldn't take any more new joins, and their presence was staggering, with there being only 3 squads and no other platoons. It was an earlier. He could tell that they were a storied and experienced bunch, as noted by the matted sheen of their chest plate and the countless scars upon their armor. He could tell that no matter how much they cleaned, it would still look like it was still covered in dirt and grime, which added to their veteran status, unlike the other companies who only wore their battle dress uniform, himself included. In the center of the room, a large waist-high hollow table was situated, and an image of the current system was displayed. In the top corner of the edge of the hologram, the name of the system was displayed, revealing it to be called Cella System. The three officers from before had then presented themselves, with all called to attention by Sergeant Auclair, whose voice reverberated greatly within the large room. "At ease," returned the major. "Now, let's begin." All others had returned to their seats in preparation for the briefing, leaving the room ultimately quiet. As you should all be well aware, we are less than 12 hours before commencing with our invasion. You should all know what our enemy looks like and the types of weapons they employ. He changed the image to a series of weapons that looked similar to their own, at least in material, but their design was foreign still, with a hint of familiarity. Like us, they still employ ballistics, but have begun transitioning to plasma, with at least one or two soldiers wielding the new tech. Your armor may be rated for heat, but we still don't have the metrics yet against direct plasma shots, although earlier reports indicate you should be able to tank a bolt or two, as long as it hits center plate. Now, here is where everyone will drop. Major Raikou then turned the image to a rough, top-down layout of a city center with several icons placed in several locations. With a star centered over a building, it indicated that was their target. To the northwest, in an area that looked like a park, the letters Vapor were encircled, with lines leading from it to indicate their route to the objective. To the northeast and east, the letters CBRA and Raven were placed respectively, with arrows leading down to the target. We're still too far for proper scans, so enemy movement is still unknown, so expect heavily contested grounds. Any questions? There was a silence in the air, as no one either had a question or simply didn't want to be the center of attention. However, a hand was shot up. It was Moran, now allocated to Raven Company. "Good evening, sir. Lance Corporal Moran. What are the rules of engagement, sir?" he said after rising from his seat and placing himself at parade rest. The reply, however, was pleasant for many. "If they wear armor, they're dead. If they so much as hold a stick, you waste them. There should be no civilian contacts, so it's open season on the bastards. Now get some rest, with your gear on. To be a raider means to be ready at all times when in the field. From now on, you will sleep, eat, and shit with your gear donned at all times. Am I clear?" he finished, to which the soldiers before him replied in unison. "Aye, sir," they sounded, reverberating throughout the hulls of the ship. They were then dismissed soon after, leaving them just around 10 hours of rest. As they were instructed, all were donned in their armor as they slept, with there being a skeleton crew of raiders on watch. Some had slept with their helmets on, while others slept with it off. He remembered doing this during some of their field exercises, but that was when they had the earth below them. Now they did so in furnished beds and comfort, which did the opposite. As a result, he woke up throughout the night, with himself waking up 5 hours before reveille. Amidst the red lighting, the berthing remained quiet, as the creaks of the ship rang out in a low hum during his traversal of his new home. As he walked about the absent corridors, he would come across a long hall with display screens beyond the hull of the ship, revealing the wealth of asteroids that surrounded them. Small bursts of lights flashed in the distance, leading him to solidify that he was in a war zone and that the Stellar Navy was currently in combat with the enemy. Within sight, just enough for him to make it out, the carriers that led them into battle were seen, albeit separated by several hundred kilometers, with small lights constantly leaving and returning. No doubt that fellow pilots were busy with their sphere of combat, to which he almost yearned for it. While he was absorbed in the sights before him, he heard muffled steps behind him, but by the time he turned around, a pair of fingers formed into a gun were placed in the front of his visor. The person behind them was familiar, with jagged teeth of the original purple visor on the edges of the helmet, with similarly colored eyes in the center. He looked down just below their neck. Auclair. "You really should turn on your helmet's sound enhancement. Otherwise, you'd be dead." She lowered her finger gun and rested against the wall with the displays to her back. It was a function he knew well of, but like the muffled quietness he experienced with the empty halls. He turned it on, revealing more than a simple hum of the ship, and sounds further down the corridor were more noticeable now. He turned to her in an attempt to converse with an experienced raider. "Sergeant, if I may, but where's the rest of Raptor Company? I noticed during the briefing that you had only 3 squads worth." She turned to him from previously viewing the distant battlefield before her. Aboard the ships currently tearing those alien bastards a new one. We do more than just land invasions, you know. He nodded, recalling the earlier simulation of a ship's interior. So he was familiar with their boarding action doctrine. With the Marines, right? But what's the point if the goal is to destroy the enemy? He asked, to which she replied with a shrug, but did so to not dismiss his genuine inquiry. Let me tell you how Raptors like to fight, she started. Command wants high-ranking officers. So what do? Board them when they're under fire, kill whoever gets in our way, take the VIPs, and scuttle the ship, she said nonchalantly. Jay was appalled, but ensured to keep his body language minimal. But he understood why, that they needed to be ruthless in the face of the enemy. Isn't that a war crime? He said with slight worry of the possible repercussions. Ha! She scoffed. War crime punishments only apply to those under the TRSC, not to alien scum who decided out of fear to invade and massacre fellow Terrans. As far as I'm concerned, they have it easy. If it were me, I'd string every Sellian who stepped into our space. But it's not my decision. I suppose, Sergeant, he said softly, to which she removed herself from the railing and towards the direction of the hangar. Just keep in mind, rookie, the enemy won't hesitate, and neither should you, she said with a wave before rounding a corner, and her footsteps disappearing quickly before the hallway returned to its silent ambience. Across from him, the small bursts of lights had simmered, before ultimately returning to its silent and natural state. With that, small dashes of lights began returning en masse to the two carriers, along with their escorts of frigates, corvettes, and cruisers. The battle seemed to be won as he noticed his ship began to orient towards the large group, with their silhouettes growing ever larger until they were basically within effective cannon range. An alarm then rang throughout the ship, waking it like a hive of hornets, with raiders erupting forth from their berthing, armor donned as a voice was sounded through worn speakers. This is the TAO all raiders. Proceed to your designated drop hangars. I repeat. Before he could go to his bed for the rest of his squad, until they met him in the corridor. Jay, said Cam as he fastened his helmet to his neck seal. You ready? I think we still have 6 hours before the timeline. Then we best head out, replied Jay as the group navigated with the rest of the raiders. The area they had entered was simplistic, being a large rectangle room with benches and weapon racks lining the walls and a centrally placed holographic table in the center. Each room was then separated to allow for a platoon's worth of individuals, and instead of a visual of their target, it was a list of names separated first into a platoon of Alpha, Bravo, or Charlie, then into 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th squads, respectively. That's how you get your designation, by falling into those groups and then adding your palace in the squad. And this is how they found out, with Jay's identifier labeled as CBRA Charlie 411. Sweet, we're in the same squad, commented Cameron. His designation was similar, with his designation as CBRA C412, with Fields as CBRA C4-13 and Spears as CBRA C410, and also designated as their fire team leader. Nice going, team lead, Fields sounded with a pat on the back of Spears before the person in red stripes before them spoke. It was the sergeant from the transport vessel that also trained them for half a year, Sergeant Faith. All right, listen up. You have your designations, so sear it into your mind. As long as you are part of this company, then these will be your call signs. If you so much as hear a whisper over comms with your tags, you answer and obey. Understood? He then turned to the man in gold beside him. Major Raiku, do you have anything for them? To which Raiku answered, not much. You all should have memorized our path and our target. But keep your comms open for orders. If you follow your training, then everything will come to you with ease. Now, we still have some time before our drop, so stand by and get set for a combat drop. He then departed, with those in the same platoon, finding seats around the staging room. On the wall, a countdown was made visible for the approximate time of their supposed drop, which added to his feeling of anxiousness. To find ease, he looked for his squad, who were seen standing beside the holographic display table. It was rugged and simple, built for utility rather than looks. He saw Cam working with the menu panel that was situated with a slant that matched the degree of the edges of the table, changing the view to an image of the fleet. Several identifiers were present, but to save space, they were severely condensed for simplicity. "To think we're invading with a fleet this old," voiced Cam, as he selected one of the numerous ships, bringing up a still image of the frame that added basic information, such as name, class, tonnage, and weapon systems. One such ship he selected was one of the two main carriers that led this invasion in the first place, the TRSC Sword of Reckoning. "You know, it's said that ships served during the Solomon Advance," voiced Jay from behind, catching them off guard. "That would make it damn near 400 years old. There's no way a ship that old would be equipped with a current slip drive and not blow up in the process," voiced Spears, denying the claim, but Jay pressed on to demonstrate his knowledge. "It's true. It was first commissioned in 2219, and it was one of several carriers to lead a counter-assault against the Solomon Advance some 60 years later. But from the looks of it, it's been retrofitted heavily. To think it's been in service this long," explained Jay. They continued surfing through the several carriers, and even exposed fighters, while Jay gave some knowledge tips on some of the most notable. "Normally, you can differ the types of frigates by the colored stripe, with some instances varying by class entirely. Look here, the destroyers." He then began to explain their differences in detail, but started off first with their main identifier, their colored strip that ran down the sides of their bows. Destroyers were painted with red, and frigates were colored yellow, green, and blue in parallel to their tonnage, from light, medium, then to heavy, just as they saw on Mars in low orbit of their recruit depot. "I'm surprised you know that much," said Spears. "You like ships that much?" Jay shook his head to the comment. "You forget, I used to be a data runner for the scum of the universe, so we had to get familiar. Luckily, I didn't have to tango with stellar fighters. Otherwise, I might be dust," he said with a laugh. As they continued, the timer continued its synchronized count while they continued to navigate through the various menus the display table had to offer, within limits. Their search ranged from weapon systems to armor components and even vehicles. As they continued to get familiar with known technology they would be bound to use. To say it was a wealth of knowledge was an understatement, and before they knew it, significant time had elapsed. As they continued, the lights lowered slightly as red strobes flashed on corners of the room. Then a call over the intercom sounded. "This is the TAO, all combat-ready raiders. Proceed to your drop pods. I repeat," said the voice as the ship rocked from an explosion just beyond their hull, and before they could sort out the explosion, a voice came through their helmet's communication. "All raiders, this is Cobra, actual to battalion. Get in your pods and get ready to drop. You've got less than 15 minutes. The call cut, leaving their room busy and chaotic. The walls were assaulted for their weapons, and the appropriate ammo was taken. Seeing this, Jay and company did the same. Jay grabbed one of the few available Badger rifles, paired with an unsuppressed sidearm. Cam did the same, with Fields and Spears both opting for the main auto rifle, the Series 8 and unsuppressed sidearms. They were all fitted with enough ammo that one could reasonably carry by placing them in extra pockets and pouches. Knives were placed in the lower part of their back, where a machined insert was created for their armor. With themselves ready and loaded with ammo and food, they set off for their pods. The way the staging room was situated, it was placed in the lower portion of the ship and ran along the center line of the ship's frame. Entrances to the rest of the ship usually entered from the forward, most or rearmost sections of the staging areas. To the left, a series of 4 doors was made with a small but thick window that peered into the hall that held their pods, 13 in total. To the right of the room, it led to a series of hangars that held landing craft, such as the Odin or something of a similar role. Spears was first to lead the squad into the leftmost door, with the number 4 above it, knowing inherently it was reserved for their squad, and speculated that this was the same with every drop hangar. As they entered, they were met with exposed drop pods, with their doors propped open, waiting for its occupant to enter. At the end of the walkway, a Sergeant Faith stood as the raider in front of them situated themselves into the pod, while Faith checked to see if it had sealed correctly. Still, the red lights flashed before turning yellow, signifying a new timeline. 5 minutes! Rookies! Get in your pods now! He yelled as he pointed to their nearest pods, each labeled at the top that matched their spot in the squad. Jay entered his pod with ease, along with the rest of his fire team. He then felt around in his dimly lit pod as the door slowly closed with a hiss, sealing him in. He would see from his polarized windows Sergeant Faith making a final check of the pod's seal before moving on to the next. He then placed his rifle into the pod's internal weapon rack with a click, and he wrapped his hands around the manual controls. As they were, he couldn't move them even if he wanted to, since they also acted as stability support until they hit terminal velocity. Until then, they would hold them until they needed to make an in-flight correction. Once Faith was done checking the last pod, he returned to his own just as the flashing lights had turned green and the intercom sounded. "This is the TAO. Launch all pods and execute your mission. I repeat." As the voice said, the floor below the pods opened, revealing a dark scene that Jay could barely make out. He didn't have to do much because the entire system was automated, and he was just in for the ride. As he tried to get a bearing on the situation below, one of his larger screens popped up with a face, with the nameplate just within view. It was Faith. "All right, you all will listen to my orders, got it? I don't need any of you playing hero, so don't go off unless you have your team with you. Team leads, get me a count," ordered Faith. As he said, the designated fire team leaders spoke into their pod's comms with affirmation that all were present. He figured this was due to the other 3 smaller screens on the left of his pod that had the frontal view of Spears, Fields, and Cameron. "Let's rock and roll, Raiders. Remember, stick with your teams and rendezvous ASAP. I'm setting each of you your team's designated zone. Clear it and then meet with the main force. No need to be afraid about being quiet. They already know we're here," he said with a nonchalant tone. "It's a good time to earn your stripes, rookies." As he said, the pod sounded a miniature countdown before he felt his stomach rise from the sudden drop. But instead of seeing with clear skies and vibrant colors, it was dark and cloudy, with only the tracers of gunfire dancing in the distance and into the air. As they continued to fall, Faith began to brief them again. "Remember, our main mission is to raise hell for the enemy, so do whatever you can to get their attention. And don't worry about ammo. We'll get it once we can secure a zone for a safe resupply drop." Jay figured he mentioned this to keep them in the mindset that they could let loose without regard for standard law. At least that was what he speculated. As they continued to fall and broke through a small layer of clouds, he saw it. A mass of tall silhouettes plagued the ground below, with smoke and fire rising from below. With it, alarms blared in the form of a monotone female voice. "Missile! Missile! Launch flares!" He did as fast as he could, slamming a big red button labeled Countermeasures IR-EM, as saw the result, not just from his own pod, but from others in his vicinity. It was an elaborate mass of sunlight that illuminated the ground below and continued as they fell to the earth below. A mix of flares and reflective material were scattered in the skies as explosions rocked the outside of his pod, as he was sure it did for the others. At first he feared that maybe one of the missiles had hit one of his friends, but seeing their continued existence on the inside of his pod alleviated that worry, and he focused on bracing for the inevitable impact. With a single drogue chute slowing their descent down to terminal, they were now in freefall. With an indicator above the countermeasure button, it told him how many were left of each, revealing he still had enough to counter several more missiles if needed. But with a flick of a switch, he set it to periodic, aiming to keep as much of a missile lock off himself for the rest of the way down, notifying the same tactic to his fire team, to which they agreed. "Woohoo! Let's get it, baby!" Fields yelled with fervor. Sergeant Faith maintained radio silence, but found that the pod shared a function that only fire team members could speak freely, suggesting that Fields use that before blurting out in a rush of adrenaline. "I've got the coordinates. Follow my ping. It should be up for you guys as well," sounded Spears. Jay looked below his pod and noticed a marker with a distance count above it. He didn't notice it until now, but it was useful. "It won't last long since we're nowhere close, but it'll give you guys an idea. Let me sync drop control so we can land together," proposed Spears, to which they all agreed. To Jay, they were already over the target, so he didn't really find a need to lend controls, but did so anyway to avoid meaningless conflict. Over the course of their drop, they would continue to receive missile warnings, but were easily alleviated with a collective use of their flares. Once their retro boosters kicked on, signifying that they were about to hit the deck, Jay then slung his rifle across his chest, with the barrel facing toward the door in a readied posture. He continued to brace for the rest of the way until he felt the hardened sensation of the seated suppressing the kinetic forces of gravity, but it became erratic as he was thrown around violently from a sudden crash. He then fell back into his seat, holding onto the controls, finding them stiff. He continued to be thrown until his eyes grew heavy, and before he knew it, he had blacked out. 2669 Private Kurt J. Within city limits. When he awoke, what he found initially was silence, followed by periodic clings and clangs against the pod. At first he figured it to be possible debris, but as it continued, and with the sound of muffled pops preceding the metal impacts, he came to another sudden realization. He was being shot at. He shook his head to alleviate a sudden ache in his head, and by ensuring his helmet was in working order, examined his surroundings from the pod's numerous forward viewports. He couldn't see immediate if his fire team was anywhere near him, only a lone soldier who continued to fire into his pod with the others growing closer. From his helmet's view, everything in view was highlighted with some form of color to differentiate between certain objects and objectives. With the light illuminating from behind his pod, it helped to further his sensor's visual capabilities at night, with it highlighting 3 individuals who continued to shoot at him. "All right, guess it's time to say hello," he said as he readied his rifle. This was to be his first live encounter with an enemy that tried to kill him before. But instead of running away, he was now on their home. As he reviewed his options, he didn't want to slowly open the door and allow them to fire before he could even leave the pod, and he was out of flares, so that left him with only one option: to blow the door open. There were 4 primers built into the doors that glowed in a dim yellow light around the frame of the pod's hatch, 2 on the top corners and 2 on the central sides. He would press 3 of the 4, turning them green, when he noticed that small team moving towards him. They faced his pod directly, leaving him with a nefarious thought, as subtle as it was, so he waited until they were close. 2 out of the 3 stayed behind, nudging their third to open his pod. As he was close, and determined him to be less than 10 feet away, Jay hit the last primer that finished the sequence, and with a dull beep of the explosive bolts for the door, it flew forward with impressive speed to launch the hatch with enough force to shatter bones. The effect felt near instant, with the door exploding from its rest position and smashed into the Cellian before him, watching momentarily as the body rag dulled with the hatch that left it mangled. However, he knew he couldn't waste time and readied his rifle, lining up a small reticle that matched the point of his rifle's laser onto the body of a shocked Cellian soldier, and fired. Sharp-toned thumps were fired from his rifle, landing square into the chest of the first, before changing his aim to the second, landing similar body mass shots. Like a marionette having its strings suddenly cut, they fell lifeless. His first kills, and they were done in silence with no one to witness. He took a deep breath as he had just begun to feel his heart accelerate. As his heart began to settle, he steeled his resolve to continue his mission and looked around for the waypoint Spears had told them. He pulled up his tactical display map that generated before him, offering a subtle blue glow of the buildings that only he could see. That was unless viewed by another on the same frequency. As he tried to widen the area, his viewing stopped arbitrarily with a set of invisible borders, likely the edge of his sensor's capabilities. Without the use of a third-party data streaming platform, their sensors were significantly reduced. However, as he looked around, he noticed a set of 3 icons in a formation labeled with call signs of his fire team. The distance was little more than 3/4 of a mile, and he began moving to the landing zone they were ordered to capture. Just before leaving his pod, he took any extra supplies it offered, placing them within a rugged backpack that sat high on his back with the use of straps and magnets. He looked around before departing, noticing the dancing lights in orbit as colossal ships delivered vital blows to one another. In his immediate overhead, Countless fighters danced with one another in lethal engagement, delivering missiles and gunfire into their desperate foes as they tried to escape their predatory adversaries, the Terrans. And among the sounds that reverberated throughout the night, a wealth of familiar gunfire were heard to his north and west. His brothers and sisters were locked in combat, and so he decided to move first to his fire team. Finding it risky to venture out into the open, he stuck close to the back alleys of the buildings for cover and concealment. He did so by breaking a window here and there or forcing open a door that was in his path, but he did so as silently as possible. He knew it would be suicidal to try to tackle larger groups, but was given the order to raise as much noise as possible. However, he found it would be just as worthwhile to minimize as many of the enemy force as possible, so he decided to keep his element of surprise. As he continued through darkened alleys, his mini-map would blink momentarily with enemy movement, and as he counted their dots, determined if they were worth the risk. With the patrol ending with 4 individuals, he decided to take that chance. "All right, let's do this, Jay," he mumbled as he moved to a location that would catch the patrol off guard, preferably from their blind spot. As they passed his darkened alley, he moved to the entrance, taking careful note of any possible interruptions, and found none. The patrol was 15 meters by the time he reached the entrance, and he aimed carefully, using the building as support. Then he fired. The first shot landed true into the back of the rear Sellian as it fell. Although suppressed, they were still close enough to hear the thump of the bullet and turn behind them in reflex. Jay continued to fire, with some of his shots wide as he overcorrected, before landing a small pattern into the torsos of the next 2 soldiers, causing them to fall on their backs. This caused the final one to turn tail away from him. He then fired what was left of his magazine, missing 3 and landing 2 in the lower back. The Sellian collapsed, and all was silent again, but he noticed a small movement from his final kill, at least what he thought was a kill. Jay approached the final Sellian and found that his had only lost the ability to walk, as it tried to reach for its weapon. He followed it, knowing well that the Sellian knew he was right above it, but crawled to its weapon nonetheless. What he saw was another soldier, but also someone who lived, just as he did. And when he took the moment to contemplate that, he was hesitant to finish the job, but it was all he could think about at that moment. That was until he recalled his first encounter 2 years ago. He was shot at with no warning, systems were invaded, people were taken as slaves, and his best friend died when he thought they were safe. He saw firsthand what they were doing, and his first instinct was to run. He left millions to a fate unknown, to an enemy he knew little about. However, the crimes they committed replayed in his mind like a movie and plagued his dreams. That was enough. In a fit of anger, he kicked over the Sellian, forcing them on their back, and he spoke. "Why?" he asked, loud enough to address the soldier directly. "Why did your people attack? What's so bad about us that you enslaved and killed us? I know what you guys did, jammed our signals, so you couldn't hear our pleas for mercy?" His words were spoken like venom to the Sellian, who could only lie in pain. "I was there. I saw it all. On Dema, on Draxus, and every small system in between. You slaughtered millions and took millions more. Answer me, alien." It coughed and used what little power it had left to remove its helmet, revealing long and pointed ears, blue-hued skin with darker markings, long hair and a cloth wrap around its head, with an adorned set of jewelry woven with the fabric. Its eyes were cat-like with narrowed slits, with two-toned irises of yellow and blue vibrancy. Even then he recognized their exotic nature, but awaited an answer all the same. "What are you talking about, Terran?" he said with disgust. "I know not of what you speak, only what the Council had revealed to us. Warmongers, thieves of our rightful territory. I care not for your people, only of mine. But I know the man who led the charge, a Sellan of legendary caliber fit to wage war against a race like you, a race of Union Vecta, no doubt. All the more reason to kill you and your race." Jay mulled over what he meant, calling him an agent of the Union, or at least that's what he thought he was called. "I'm not a dog of the Union, or whatever they are. I'm a citizen of the Republic of Terra. Your people had no right waging war on us, so let that be your last mistake. he rebuked as raised his rifle, pointed at the head of the downed Celian, and fired. With a distinct click of his rifle's bolt, he ejected the magazine and inserted a new one before sending the bolt forward, loading a new round into the chamber. He then sighed once more as he scanned his environment, noticing movement in the distance to his east. They were large and curved that looked like they hovered, lacking wheels as they moved closer to him. It had to be just past 1,000 meters. "Oh shit!" he yelled audibly before rushing to cross the other side of the street when gunfire erupted towards him. He dove from his sprint, finding himself behind the cover of an abandoned car, but given the type of fire he was receiving, it was probably going to blow if they kept on firing. Thinking quickly, he pulled a smoke grenade from his belt and tossed it toward the incoming vehicle patrol. Almost instantly, the grenade erupted with a large cloud of smoke that danced to the currents of the air, creating a wall of smoke that seemed to disrupt their earlier bouts of accurate fire, allowing himself to rush the nearest alley entrance. To prevent them from following him, he threw another smoke further down the road to the west. He then ran, finding himself beside a building that had a series of ladders leading up to an open window. He climbed it to the top before entering the small room he had now found himself in. He settled down and listened, utilizing his helmet's ability to enhance sounds. Unlike tanks or APCs that he was familiar with, he noticed a low-pitched hum coming from the main road. He then peeked out from the windows that overlooked the road to his east and the alleyway he had just entered from to his west. There was a large contingent of Celian soldiers that spanned across the road behind their hover tanks when he barely heard a conversation at the entrance of the alley. "Chief Captain, we think the Terran escaped to the west and used more smoke to cover their retreat. Shall we follow?" It was just a lowly soldier who gave the report, but Jay was able to see the individuals who spoke. By utilizing his helmet's magnifying function, he got a better picture of what he might be dealing with. Indeed, the main force will continue west to Sendri Park. In the meantime, gather a small force to find this Terran and its vermin allies. It's possible the smoke may just be a diversion. Radio in if your search comes up empty, and meet with us at Sendri, ordered the chief captain. With that, the sounds of thunderous boots and the sound of their armored vehicles began to fade, leaving behind a small force he couldn't immediately see visually or on his minimap. As he waited, he now noticed them popping up on the outer edges of his map, with at least 4 taking to the alley, and with the rest taking to the road and into the buildings. In total, the small force that hunted him was around 15 in total, and in his eyes it was too much for someone of his skill to take on, if he was still a pilot. He had the training and the confidence to do what needed to be done. He was a raider through and through, and he couldn't sully their reputation by not taking on a task that could put his friends in danger if they continued to the north. Even if they were against Sergeant Faith's orders, he had now opted to engage in his own battle. He grabbed a grenade from his belt, pulling the pin and getting set to release it upon the alley team. It was a rough estimate he made, but thought that it was enough time to prime during the fall and explode just as it would hit the ground in the middle of their formation. By timing it with his mini-map, he extended his arm out the window and let it fall by releasing the charging handle, taking care to not let it land on the escape railings just outside. 5 seconds would pass, and a muffle boom sounded paired with a set of pain screams. He looked down below, noticing 2 motionless bodies, with another pair missing an arm and another missing a chunk from his torso in addition to his hands. The one with the most injuries would slowly succumb to his wounds, leaving the only survivor, the one with a missing arm. Alarmed by the explosion, the team searching the buildings rushed to their assistance with a group of 6, with one clearly tasked with being their squad medic. "Hold still, Tarla. You'll be fine. Tell us what happened," said the medic to the grimacing Celian who took the blast. "I don't know. It came out of nowhere," they said, trying to explain what little they could. As the medic continued to treat the individual named Tarla, Jay readied his rifle and aimed through the window down to the medic. They were in a position that he had a clear line of sight while aiming through the break in the ladder well he had previously climbed through. The angles seemed too perfect to let go, and he aimed, lining his weapon's reticle on the head of the Celian as they tried to help their brethren. But before he fired, he noticed a small group of ships that were flying too low for his liking, but thought to use that to cover the sound of his shot. Once they had passed him, the boom of their engines almost deafened him, but thanks to his helmet, severely limited it during their pass, and he fired. The shot was instant, with the medic ceasing his actions midway through before collapsing on the Celian they were treating. Then chaos erupted among the 5 remaining as they searched for Jay. He was a ghost to them, and with no casing to give away his position, and retreated into the building as he searched for another route to his teammate, all of whom were still alive and well according to his tactical map. He was put at ease when that was the case, knowing well that Spears was leading them. After reassessing his situation, he now only had 2 ways he can travel: through the escape ladders, which had access to the roof, or continue down to ground level. He looked to his mini-map again and found the enemy moving about erratically, with some moving in an elliptical pattern, with their elevation indicators slowly rising. At least 5 of them were moving up the main stairwell of the building, searching through the rooms. He noticed their reaction was quick, which gave him little room to sit and assess. Currently, the squad before him were numbered to 10, with 5 scouring the outside and the other 5 searching his building. They were beginning to progress quickly. As such, they were a floor before him when he decided to take to the stairwell, peeking his body out from a doorway with his rifle steady and a primed grenade in the other. He waited until the icons moved to the mid-step of the stairway, where he saw his victim and fired, landing it square into the chest and causing them to fall back on his comrade behind him. As a first, the enemy returned fire, causing him to retreat into his room, where he gave a short toss with his grenade. He released his grip from the charge handle as it bounced against the walls and down the stair, well before landing with a thud on the mid-platform that allowed a change in direction for the stairwell. With another muffled boom, screams sounded as they tried to alert the others from outside. "The stairs! They're up the stairs!" cried one. Jay took this moment to scale down the stairs with his weapon drawn, firing 1 bullet to the head of slain Celians before coming across the last one who survived the ordeal, 5 in total. Upon seeing Jay, they fired their sidearm, to which he retreated behind the wall of the staircase. It fired what remained of its weapon before a click was sounded, giving him ample time to swing around the corner, and fired into the Celian that rested its back on a wall that faced him. Just as they warned, Jay saw on his motion sensor the last 5 assailants who pursued him. To meet them, he would conjure up a tactic with what little time he had. He grabbed the Celian he killed and dragged it into the left room, making sure to leave a bountiful trail of green liquid before tossing the body with disregard. He then took his last offensive grenade, setting it so that the pressure of the body held down the charging handle for the grenade. "Just like the vids," he mumbled to himself, getting the idea from an action movie that had recently come out. He then returned to the hallway and entered into the opposite room with the door cracked open, and waited in the darkest corners of the room with his weapon poised. He waited until the markers on his mini-map indicated they were on the same level as himself before they stopped to assess the damage. With a crack in the door's seal, Jay was able to listen in on their discussion. "By the fathers, what happened here? Chief?" said the nearest one to his closest entrance. "I don't know," he replied as he looked around, finding more bodies leading up to the stairwell. "3 of you search up top, Heresk. Search that room. I'll search this one," he said before the markers on his mini-map dispersed, as the chief indicated. 3 went to the top, the other continued into the room across, and 1 entered through his door. However, Jay didn't fire. Instead, waited for his trap that he planted prior. The Celian before him used a light to scan the room initially, but Jay crouched behind some furniture, keeping well behind that wide sofa. After seeing the light move away from him, he silently peered from behind his cover and found that the Celian was closer than he anticipated. Slowly, he moved to the target, who spoke to himself in low tones, low enough for Jay to hear and assess that he had yet to be discovered. "Damned council. They just had to go around sticking their noses into places they didn't need to. Now look at us, fending off an enemy that routed Torlak. If I was a captain, then maybe I could have been off-world. But no, I have to deal with a bloodthirsty Terran from fathers knows where." Jay continued to use their monologue to his advantage, before closing in with a single lunge. He had already lowered his rifle and pulled his knife, edge facing away from him. By using a technique taught to all raiders, he used his left hand to grab the chin of the Celian and lifted it up while simultaneously driving the knife tip into the mid-portion of the throat. To finish the job, he pushed the knife away, tearing through their throat. It was messy, but it was designed to stop enemy forces from being able to call reinforcements by cutting their larynx and windpipe together. As such, Jay stood there momentarily at his first knife kill and the amount of blood that stained the floor beneath him and the blade, with the motionless Celian chief that rested at his feet. Then, with a call from the soldier in the next room, he addressed the slain chief, unknowing of their fate. "Chief Jaska, I think this one might still live," he sounded before an explosion sounded, promptly cutting him off and alerting the three above. "To think that worked," said Jay as he was returned to reality. He readied his rifle once more, aiming through the door as the remaining three ran down to the site of the explosion. They rushed the room that had dust kicked up as they looked for any survivors. He then left his previous spot and made his way into the room opposite of him, where they were all facing away from him. Their bodies were highlighted through the dust, and did as his body remembered, as he was trained to do, and fired into them before they had the time to react. With the closest Celian, he missed wide before narrowing his pattern, killing the first, followed by the second. The third person, however, was able to fire back and did so with the weapon's automatic function. By reflex, Jay dove to the side where an interior wall separated them. Jay then rushed away from his old position as he tried to regain his footing, and as he was about to round the wall's left-hand side, he met his opponent who thought the same thing he did. It was the first that he was put on the back pedal thus far, but instead of contemplating his enemy's skill, he instead focused on the opponent at hand. He noticed the Celian's weapon wasn't on him as they rounded and used his barrel, and his rifle as a whole, to swat it to the side with enough force to disarm the Celian. His heart raced from the imminent danger as he continued to fight. With his rifle facing away from his opponent, Jay released his hand from his rifle's grip and tried to deliver a backhanded fist to his opponent, which was barely blocked by the forearm of the Celian. With his rifle exposed and not under his control, the Celian delivered a kick to his rifle with enough force to detach it from its sling, which caught him by surprise as it collided with the wall. "What a kick," he thought to himself as he readied himself in a warrior's stance. He then removed his knife from its sheath and brandished it in a warrior's posture, with his free hand poised together with his knife in front of him. He then widened and lowered his center of gravity as he readied to strike. With a couple of small but quick steps to close the distance, Jay lunged with a stab. When it was evaded with a sidestep from the Celian, he transitioned his attack to a slash, hoping to catch their underarm. As he tried to maintain control of the fight, Jay kept their distance close as he managed his strikes, but noticed that the Celian didn't strike back or attempt to counter by blocking a strike. He paused. Other than the sudden kick to his rifle that surprised him, there was nothing else that spoke to him that the person before him was actually a warrior. Their posture, their stance, everything spoke amateur, and in the end, it didn't feel right and when he observed in greater detail. As his adrenaline began to wear off, his analysis of his enemy began to gain clarity as the person he was in contest with seemed lacking. Seeing how he controlled the fight, so too did he control the dialogue. He then backed away several steps toward his fallen rifle before asking, "What troop are you from, Celian?" They paused for a moment, shocked to hear his words, but replied shortly after, "Just of the Standard Army, a conscripted soldier. What of it, Terran?" they said with snide. Jay then lowered his knife and placed it behind him in its sheath before pulling out his sidearm, something he had forgotten about during his earlier fight, and aimed it at the Celian. He didn't know what he felt, but he largely felt disappointed. Part of him wanted a challenge, but only found disappointment in the end. Who he fought were nothing but conscripts, trained at a minimum en masse. In short, they were cannon fodder, and he felt no pride in trying to engage in an enemy that wasn't properly trained. "So what now? You going to shoot me? Come then, Akhtari!" they screamed as they stood defenseless against a wall. As he looked around the room, he noticed that strewn about were clothes, toys, and jewelry. Even different sizings of shoes that indicated a family lived here, and within it, the bodies of soldiers laid about, with the only sole survivor having their back placed against a wall. "You know," Jay began sorrowfully, "if it was just a couple of years ago, I don't think I would have been able to pull the trigger like this," he said as he leveled his sidearm in line with the Cellian. "But times change, I guess," said Jay as he fired 3 shots into their chest and watched as they collapsed against the wall, as the blood from the exit wounds stained the wall behind them. He then holstered his sidearm and found his rifle with its broken sling. He branded his rifle and left the building, taking caution to watch for any unwanted opposition. Luckily, that wasn't the case, and his route remained quiet until he got closer to his fire team's last known position. Gunfire seemed constant, and when he checked his map for a brief moment, noticed there were more than just his fire team engaged in combat. They were situated on the 2nd floor of a building to their north, and when he looked at his map, he was delivered enemy pings that sat across from them in the buildings to their south and east. That left Jay in the perfect position to conduct a pincer maneuver with the enemy. He checked his ammo, having spent roughly half in his previous engagements, before moving towards his comrades locked in a firefight. 69, Lance Corporal Spears, Jason, city limits of Artray. With what seemed like ages having passed, Spears loaded another magazine into his rifle and fired selective shots into the enemy across from them, which seemed countless and unending. Behind him, Cameron was crouched over a raider as he applied pressure to a wound while he waited for a biofoam canister to be delivered from Fields, who went to search their pods for one. This left Spears and several others to maintain cover fire. "Damn it, Fields, hurry it up, or we'll lose him," he yelled to the scavenging raider in question. "I'm trying. I almost got clipped," he replied, "and I don't think we packed any." "It's part of a survival kit, so you'd better damn well find it," he ordered before firing a small burst of rounds into the window of a peeking Cellian. "How you doing, Cam? How's it looking?" Spears then directed a call to the person in question as they struggled to staunch the bleeding. He had just finished stuffing the wound with another fresh set of med gauze. "I still need the biofoam for its bioreactant. Otherwise, I can't seal the wound," he reported as he tried to search a small bag that contained dwindling medical supplies. He was just out of the one thing he actually needed. Spears cursed at their situation, turning to the 5 other raiders that fought with him. They were all new, having no markings on their armor, except for the one person they were treating, a raider with white stripes on his shoulders and helmet. After they had landed, it was quiet initially, and while they tried to search for Jay, they were met with another group who had been attacked and were attempting to evacuate the only one who was shot. Unknown to Spears that they had also brought with them an entire patrol who were dead set on taking their lives, as well as it being their first firefight in a live scenario. Luckily, Spears had his mind right and began barking orders that they willfully obeyed. Since then, they had been doing nothing but fighting, conserving what ammo they had left, which had brought them to their current situation. "Find it yet, Fields?" he ordered, peeking over his cover to see that Fields was waist-deep in a pod where his legs were sticking out. Yeah, I think so. This it?" He flashed a canister that was shaped oddly, with a steel proboscis that delivered the foam. With strong affirmation amid the wealth of enemy fire, Spears said, "That's it! Now get your ass in here, ASAP!" Before he knew it, Fields had returned to the side of Cameron, who began removing the previous set of gauze and placed the canister's tube into the wound. With a press of the handle, the canister sent out a wealth of its foam, filling the wound. With its delivery, the writhing corporal before them had stopped moving, and their breathing had stabilized. Cam relaxed on his rear, letting out a sigh of relief. "Thank goodness you found it, Fields. Didn't think you would," said Cam. "Hey, now you can't say I don't do nothing for you," he said with a smirk before a call from Spears captured his attention. "Now that you're back, watch our entries. We don't need any surprises," he ordered. As he continued to deliver a round across the way to his south, he was met with Cameron, who hid behind a portion of his cover. His rifle was slung, and blood from the raider stained his thighs and lower torso, but paid no mind to them himself. "Spears, can you get in contact with Jay?" he asked pleadingly, to which he shook his head. "Got no comms right now, but it looks like the TAC map still works. Last I checked, he was less than a mile south, so he should be coming up soon. Hopefully, he hears the noise and comes to help, replied Spears, delivering another burst of bullets into an uncovered enemy, killing them. I hope he's all right, said Cam in a worried manner. He will be. He's a good shot, and he's decent at moving quietly. If he's learned anything, he'll pop up soon enough. Cam nodded in agreement to the praise of his friend. He knew that they were all trained the same, but others took to the training more than some, with Jay taking to it along with Spears, Fields, and even Moran. Cameron knew this, scraping by, but knew deep down he wasn't a fighter like the rest, but instead found passion in saving others, just the raider they had saved. Spears noticed this and took a pause from shooting. Look, I know this ain't exactly your gig, but you're a raider, and from the looks of it, we're light on medics, so why don't you focus on that? Just keep on you a sidearm or a PDW. You don't want to get caught without one, good? He said, trying to ease the mind of a faltering Cameron. Even now, Cam had yet to fire a single shot, as he couldn't bring himself to commit to the act. However, that didn't stop him from doing his duty to assist his teammates, most notably with his first assist in saving their corporal's life. But as they continued fighting, they had begun to notice the lessened volume of fire from the enemy, as they looked to be preoccupied with a new problem of their own. Spears then looked at his tactical map display, with others looking at it from afar and noticed the tags above the friendly icon, CBRA C410. That's Jay, yelled Cam, as he looked in the direction of where he was on the map, which was directly across from them in the building where the Celian soldiers had set themselves up. It was a wonder why they didn't advance, and Spears thought that they may have been waiting for reinforcements. Seeing this sudden change in focus, Spears ordered the other 5 raiders to do what they do best. Ravens, split up and take the east and west approach. Use the buildings for cover. Fields, take overwatch. Cam, take care of the corporal. Move it, he ordered, taking a spot with the team that had one less than the other. His team took to the west and moved through the building's office space with ease, avoiding most clutter and windows while clambering over anything that got in their way. As they moved closer, the gunshots grew erratic and desperate, mixed with explosions and the arrival of smoke that began to filter through the exposed windows. As he looked in the direction of the fight, a small, friendly waypoint danced around the building. He continued in a rush to assist Jay, but by doing so, they ran into a small group of Celians who waited down below on the first floor, seemingly waiting for Jay. Without a moment's hesitation, Spears ordered their execution. Contacts, front! And a wave of Terran made ballistics punctured through their armor and flesh, leaving them empty and riddled with holes as they moved to meet their comrade. They slowed their pace after entering the enemy spaces and kept their rifles raised just below their eyeline. They had met the other group that came from the east, reporting that they had no resistance. Hearing this, Spears ordered that they enter a tactical column as they progressed through the building, just as they were trained. Jackson, take point, he ordered, and their stack moved through the stairwell with purpose and caution. As per his suit's sensors, it indicated that Jay was on the 3rd floor, and his mini-map indicated that there were still some soldiers on the 2nd floor. That was his priority that his team began to execute. In a practiced manner, the team moved through the 2nd floor, securing the main hallway first before moving into the individual rooms that lined the hall. After clearing the first doors in a wide sweeping angle, Spears would enter with his weapon poised and ready to fire. He took the northern side of the hall, which originally faced him and his team from across the courtyard. He noticed first the several motionless bodies that he suspected were from the first minutes of their encounter before sweeping the rest of the room. It wasn't large, so it offered little in the way of cover. There was, however, a door across of him that led into a parallel room that faced the courtyard. In a similar manner as before, he focused on clearing the corners of the room as he made a wide angle before entering. However, by the door that would lead into the hallway, there was a pair of Celians who hid behind some furniture. They were crouching, but his night visor identified them as foes and not as corpses, so he fired into them, reducing their red highlights into amber, the same color as the walls and plants were outlined with. He heard several more shots from across the hall, indicative of the pair's success. He opened the door and was met with a pair of raiders who took the southern offices. To their left, a stairwell that led to the third floor was left unoccupied, and until now, Spears noticed the lack of gunfire that they were bombarded with prior, which left him wondering on the state of Jay. As they moved up to the third floor, they found more of the same, spent smoke canisters and fragments of Sellian limbs about, most notably from the use of grenades or perhaps pure rage. He couldn't tell, but as he advanced, he was met with an open door, and within, Jay's waypoint sat motionless. Spears held up a hand, signifying the team to halt as he proceeded alone into the room, where he was met with a bloodied Jay. His left arm was dripping with red liquid as he wielded his sidearm in his right. When he walked up beside him, he saw who he had his handgun pointed to, a cowering chief with two of his subordinates dead in a pool of their own blood, with it staining the chief's gray-colored clothing. But before he could get a word in, Jay fired into the head of the Sellian chief, causing the rest of its body to go limp. Spears then spoke to the stoic Jay to see if his mind was still right, especially after a scene he had just walked through. "You good, Jay?" he said softly. Jay then holstered his sidearm and picked up his spent, suppressed rifle and nodded. "Yeah, you guys got any meds?" he replied, turning towards the exit. "Cam's got 'em. Might even have some mags for your S4 too," offered Spears. "Didn't he use 'em?" he inquired as they made their way down to the first floor. "He didn't have it in him to commit. Hell of a medic, though, I'll tell you," praised Spears as they entered the courtyard where their pods sit. "Looks like our zone is clear, so I'll set a resupply beacon. In the meantime, go see Cam. He'll take care of you." As he approached their bullet-riddled building, he was met with a wave from the windows. It was Fields. He climbed to the second story where he was met with a busy Cam, who was seen treating their only wounded. Cam was slow to notice, but lit up at the sight of seeing Jay, then quickly turned worried upon seeing the wounded Jay. "What happened?" he said, rushing to the side of his most damaged appendage. "Just a firefight," he said before taking a seat on an available chair. Cam then removed what he could of Jay's pauldrons and forearm plates before assessing the damage. "Luckily, it's just a flesh wound. Round must have crazed you, but it tore your environmental suit. Let me patch it," he said softly as he began to work. His eyes were soft, yet focused, and his hands worked delicately before applying needed pressure to certain parts of his arm for the bandage to adhere to. He assisted Jay in donning his armor after injecting him with a minor painkiller before finishing up. "I applied a medical-grade salve, so it should help with numbing the area and boost the healing process. Just let me know if it starts to hurt, and I can reapply a sting," he said before packing up his gear and returned to the corporal. "What happened to him?" asked Jay as he took the time to rest while he could. "Took a sniper round in his lower abdomen, just below his ballistic protection. Not even the kinetic fluid would have stopped it. I don't think he'll be able to walk unless he gets treated at a facility, but the nearest one is Alameda." Cam had begun to sulk when Jay placed an arm on his shoulder in reassurance. "We just need to call for a medevac and let them know his condition. There might be a ship in the fleet that could at least stabilize. Won't do him good to be down a single raider," he said with confidence. The only issue was their comms were still down, but they could still issue a beacon for a resupply. With a crash, Jay directed his attention to Fields, who looked wholly unconcerned with the sudden crash, which told him they had their supplies. "Ask and you shall receive," said Fields as he motioned his chin towards the courtyard. "Got supplies, so stock up while you can. We got orders to destroy whatever we don't take, so load up." Jay nodded, as did Cam, and headed down towards the site of the supply cache. It was a moderately sized crate that had boxes of ammo for just about any weapon they employed in the TRSC, and they took what they could. Aside from just ammo, they were also filled with a wealth of medical supplies and extra bags for each to carry. While each person settled with an extra bag attached to their left thigh, Cam settled for extra, placing them on both legs and filling his backpack with even more medical supplies than one would reasonably carry. They weren't given any new weapons to play with, so they were stuck with using what they had dropped with. "If we're good, let's blow this, then regroup with the main force. Thomas, Jackson, see if you can make a stretcher from what you can find. We need to exfil the corporal. We can't leave him," ordered Spears before turning to Cameron. Cam, go with them and make sure it's good enough to lift with. For now, you're our medical expert. They all agreed to his terms and began working, leaving Spears, Jay, Fields, and 3 of Raven Company to pull security while his order was fulfilled. And when they were filled with extra supplies, promptly detonating what they didn't use, to deny the enemy possible resources and ammo. Even with limited map functions, they were all forced to remember their attack plan, as previously briefed on multiple occasions, and their latest was from Sergeant Faith, whom they had yet to get in contact with. However, they followed what they were told to do and continued to fight. To not place their wounded in harm's way, they would send them away while the rest would move opposite of them so that they wouldn't draw the enemy's fire. That was the case for the first several instances when Spears, Jay, and Fields conducted ambushes against mobilizing troops that allowed for Cam and most of Raven Team to move while the enemy's focus was on the diversion team. "Fields, Jay! Nades, use them!" ordered Spears as he fired several well-placed shots into the group of vulnerable Sellians. He targeted important-looking individuals, those who usually sported robes instead of armor and an undersuit. The rest of his team focused on the other soldiers who surrounded them, throwing high-explosive grenades into pools of concentrated enemies, resulting in a bloody mess. Several of their ambushes ended in this way, those with unsuppressed rifles taking most of the focus, while any who had some form of a suppressed weapon flanked. Mixed with the constant gunfire from the distance, or the ships flying overhead, it was nothing short of overstimulus for the unfortunate. When all became quiet, Spears spoke. "That's another patrol, boys. Good work. Let's regroup with Cam and his team. We shouldn't have much to go before making rendezvous with Sergeant Faith." "How much longer, boss man?" sounded Fields as he inserted a fresh magazine. "Not too far. The meetup is supposed to be a courtyard big enough for some dropships, and that's where we're supposed to prep for Stage 2, explained Spears. "Stage 2, questioned Fields, to which Jay said with chide. "You really didn't pay attention to the briefs, did you? All you need to know is that we have to push to a secure location and prep to attack the main objective. With that, we need to secure several locations that can provide a safe place for ships to land," said Jay with disapproval in his voice. "I can only listen to the same thing so much before I tune it out, all right?" When he finished, Spears paused him as he held a finger to his helmet's comm set, asking for silence. It was sudden, but his action caused those around him to hold their breath. "Understood, Sergeant. We'll move now, but we have wounded that need a medevac." "Understood. We'll get it done." By now, they had regrouped with Cam and his detail when Spears received a call, where they received a call that was transmitted on all levels for all raiders. "All companies, this is Raptor Actual. I have mission authority, so I'm updating your TAC map with waypoints for likely targets and platoon advances. Stand by and execute your orders when received." It was from a voice they haven't heard before, nor seen the individual who called themselves Raptor Actual, but they were believed to have been the deep space element that was rumored. Jay wondered how they operated so far out, with little to no support, but found it inspiring to say the least. And as he said, their tactical displays were updated with live pings of large enemy movement. It was simply by suggestion that they understood their current mission, which was to assault these large forces of enemies while their positions were revealed. In addition, their range of the display was increased, revealing larger concentrations of raiders, allowing for a larger troop planning. And with it, waypoints were updated for each team too far from one another, each tasked with an appropriate objective, and theirs just happened to take them close to their primary objective. "Listen up," addressed Spears to his team. "We have our mission now, but we can't abandon the corporal. Cam, you'll take your detail to the nearest raider patrol, while Fields, Jay, and I make some noise. Ravens, you're on guard duty, and like the Major said, if they wear armor and weapons, and they're not a raider, you put them down. Follow your map and take the path of least resistance. We'll kick up the dust so you can move with ease. Good?" The Ravens affirmed with a nod and set off with Cam in tow towards the largest group of raiders. However, the rest of their Cobra fire team remained as the three, set with a task by order of the current mission authority, Raptor Actual, to assault any and all enemy patrols. "Search and destroy, huh?" said Spears. "I think we can do that." They readied themselves, checking their ammo, grenades, and everything they stored away into their packs and pouches that could assist them in making as much noise for the enemy as possible. 2669, Private J. Kurt, Central Art Ray Limits. "Keep it going! Fire! Fire!" roared Spears as he and Fields delivered a wealth of gunfire into an oncoming patrol. The size was larger than what they had fought before, but the distance was far enough that most of their shots were fired wide, missing their mark entirely. But to make sure they don't end up as liquid from enemy vehicles and snipers, Spears would occasionally order their repositioning. "Move it!" he yelled. "What about our reinforcements?" then screamed Fields amidst the constants of cracks and whirs of enemy fire, mixed with an occasional plasma round, something they had yet to see. "I think they have plasma," Fields added. "On their way, but first we gotta get them in a kill box first, so start moving northeast to those buildings," replied Spears. They were in a small building that overlooked a road that led from the east to the west. It was larger, and they saw that it could allow for large amounts of traffic to pass through, and Spears saw it as a perfect opportunity for a preemptive strike, while they bought time for the larger force to interject. "And don't worry, they'll be here. Just gotta hold out for a little while," said Spears as they descended a flight of stairs. "Okay, but what about Jay?" voiced Fields with concern. "He's just waiting. They don't even know he's there," replied Spears as they began entering into another building that overlooked the main road and began firing. They continued this pattern for several more minutes, landing lethal shots into plenty of the enemy force, but noticed more coming over the horizon, this time with larger vehicles that hovered and carried a single barrel atop its frame. "Is that a tank?" cried Fields as he took cover from a wave of enemy fire. "Damn it," cursed Spears as he also lowered in cover. "I don't have any anti-tank. Move it!" Their breathing was ragged as they have been fighting since their drop, which was several hours ago, but couldn't tell the difference since all they did thus far was run and gun. It left them exhausted, but thanks to their previous conditioning, they recovered faster than normal whenever they were able to rest, whether it was a minute or 30 seconds. Before Spears could get up, an explosion rocked the wall beside them, leaving a massive hole beside them. They were grateful the blast didn't liquefy them, but knew they had to move now. "It's got a beat on us. Go, 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 down the stairs," ordered Spears. They did as he said, descending the stairs before another shot landed in the area they had just occupied, with sudden debris and dust assaulting them. It was only a matter of time before they got overrun. "Got your smokes?" asked Spears as they ran west, then north to the closest raider force. He then pressed a button on his helmet that connected him to his fire team's communication frequency. "Jay, back out. The enemy has mechanized infantry and tanks. We're regrouping with the rest of Cobra and Raven. How copy?" With a hushed tone, he received a reply from the person in question. "Sure, if I'm not knee-deep in an alien formation." "What's your status?" "Hidden. They're searching the alleyways and some of the buildings, but they're keeping to the road. Looks like they're setting up a firing line." Spears then took that information and relayed it to his sergeant, who agreed. "Got it. The main group is heading to your way now. Stand by," said Faith as he cut the comms, leaving the two to wait. They had waited for what seemed like an eternity when the first signs of their company began arriving. It was also without a moment's hesitation that the large force moved to the area they had previously inhabited, clearing the alleyways and buildings of immediate threats. It was a wonder that the Celian barricade didn't fire, and when they cleaned up their section of the buildings, they held their fire. It was then they were reunited with Jay, who was covered in dust and scrapes, but came out unharmed all the same, alleviating his earlier worry, same as Fields. "Glad you made it. How was your recon?" Spears said jokingly. "Good. They're taking cover in the buildings across, and the vehicles are looking for something to turn into mincemeat," replied Jay. However, they knew they couldn't be at a standstill for long, and were soon met with the presence of their company commander. "All right, boys and girls, we have the scans of enemy movement, and we can't wait. Get ready to disorient and charge. We'll find a way to get rid of that armor soon, but in the meantime, target the infantry first. Got it?" They roared in agreement and made their way to their positions, and without so much as a time to rest, Their first shot rang out. Then chaos erupted. The gunfire from the enemy was numerous, and so was their own. But the only difference between the two was that the enemy had armor and they didn't. Still, Jay, Spears, and Fields continued to fire upon the enemy. Jay was slow and precise, looking for vulnerable targets before delivering them to eternity. Spears was quick with his acquisition and suppressed the enemy more than he could finish them off, but it helped the other raiders finish off the enemy, slowly but surely. With Fields, he had finished unloading a full magazine's worth into a small patrol that had tried to flank them, in the end securing their flanks. Yet still, the fighting continued, and with the enemy's armor, whittled down what cover little they had and took any unfortunate raider was right behind it. "Damn it! They hit Mikey! Medic!" called out one raider who dragged a bloodied comrade behind extra cover, with Cam attempting to help. He did what he could to staunch the bleeding, but not everyone who got wounded was able to survive. But Cam still pressed on to help those who could. Little by little, their ammo ran low in their firefight, and as they were nearing their end, an explosion erupted in one of the enemy vehicles, reducing it to fire and debris. Then another, followed by a large crack, then a smaller burst of thumps. Thump, 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 thump. The shots were precise and deadly, landing into the vehicle's broadside, reducing its occupants to ash and liquid. Then a call came over their proximity radios. "Cavalry's here, boys! Let us at 'em!" It was an operator of the large grizzly tank before them, accompanied by 2 rhinos and a squad of pumas, who raced throughout the city roads delivering a hail of bullets to stragglers, unfortunate enough to get caught by them. "And watch overhead and take some cover," sounded the grizzly operator as he continued to the mass of soldiers that continued to approach from the east. It was like a screaming eagle that rained down upon their enemy with an extraordinary amount of force and lethality, reducing the buildings across from them into rubble. And with it, the enemy icons on their tactical displays were reduced to a handful before their guardian angel turned its arsenal on the enemy forces they couldn't see. "Charge!" roared the major as he led from the front, with Jay, Fields, and Spears following close behind, with Cam remaining behind to help the wounded. When they entered the ruined buildings, a small gathering of Sellians had tried to orient themselves and were given little time to prepare for their upcoming massacre. Before them, Riku stood tall and menacing. He didn't know whether they were going to run or fight. Seeing that they held no firearms, running seemed like an obvious choice. However, one Sellian had mustered the courage he needed to charge at the major with their fist raised and roared. However, Riku caught the fist, causing the Sellian to halt in their tracks. He then delivered a fierce kick to its upper abdomen, just below their armpit, and pulled. It screamed at the pain it had suddenly been exposed to, and fell back. Instead of being whole, it was now missing an arm as it continued to bleed out. It continued to scream for several seconds before stopping, likely due to severe blood loss. Only 20 seconds? Interesting, he said before rushing the frozen and still group that were horrified at the scene they had witnessed, an arm torn clean off from nothing but brute strength. As they stood frozen, Riku continued to beat into them with the arm of their compatriot until the group was left bleeding to death, or already dead from the blunt force trauma. Riku then looked at the arm of the alien. He found it to be reduced to bone and loose flesh, covering himself in their blood from his swings. The group behind him were silent at the display, so he addressed them before continued on their main objective. It may seem uncouth for some, but know this, the enemy is not human, and what they did to our colonies will not be forgotten. This is the perfect time to execute your frustrations upon the enemy before laws are made for their protection. Carry on to the objective. Move it. Let them know the fear of a raider, he ordered with a large roar, not just in proximity, but in all radio bands to all in Cobra and Raven companies. And so they pressed on. With the help of their overhead gunship, much of the enemy advance was reduced to stragglers that were then promptly hunted down by the Puma teams. This allowed them to move with no resistance to their target location, which was a large building with a wall around it. But instead of finding the enemy within them, there was nothing on their sensors to indicate otherwise. They entered and found a group already in place that stood by. They were worn and ragged, with only 2.5 worth of a platoon, but they stood tall and ready. They only stood from afar, but Jay watched the interaction between the Major and Lieutenant Jakal, with the other officer donned in gold, but had markings on his helmet in the form of eyes and a wide smile filled with jagged teeth. They were too far to listen to, since his helmet was filtering all kinds of conversations between raiders, so it had hard to pinpoint. It was only when they left that they received their orders. "All right, we have an enemy force approaching from the south. Raven Company, have your men secure ground level. The rest of Cobra, take to the buildings and prepare to overwatch. Now move," ordered Riku, to which those present replied in a hearty "Ura." It didn't take long for them to get into position, and they did as they were ordered, to wait for enemy, but to hold their fire until Raven engaged first. As they were informed, there was still a small force that was going to meet them. However, before they were dismissed, Faith stopped Spears' fire team, as they were nearly a foot out of the gate to the compound. "Spears, get your team and pull security indoors. There's a landing pad that needs to be secured for shuttle transport. Get to it." "Understood, Sergeant. Jay, Cam, Fields with me. Are we expecting hostiles?" he asked, to which he shook his head to the sides. "Raptor should have already secured it, but don't let your guard down," said Faith, and he fiddled with a wrist-mounted device. Upon their HUDs, a transparent icon visualized within the building that revealed the distance to be less than 100 meters. "It's not far, but I don't feel like giving directions. Secure that AO because we're planning to get some higher-ups down here on the first ship. Good to go?" Spears nodded and promptly left the courtyard towards the building's main entrance. As they entered, small groups of Raven fire teams littered about the building, likely tasked with the interior security if the enemy happened to breach the walls. Jay noticed that they took this time to rest, as their armor was scuffed, muddied, with some having suffered direct hits to their armor. He unconsciously placed a hand to his chest, as if expecting to find an entry wound, but found none. Compared to the rest before him, if not for the stains of green liquid that stained his armor, it would seem like he didn't really participate. However, he found his worry to be baseless, as he was greeted with a common grunt of a greeting, returning the same "rah" that was said to him as his team walked to their objective. "Cam, you got a rag on you?" requested Jay, to which his friend obliged, taking out a rag from one of his several pouches and began to wipe down the stains on his ballistic protection. Passing through a set of doors, they found themselves in a modest room that led to a series of 5 raised seats that looked down on a circle that was lit up with lights. It was an audience chamber of sorts, as Jay referenced several books and media on ancient cathedrals and modern board of directors. At least that's what it seemed to him. With his armor clean, his armor looked like it had yet to see actual combat, but he ignored that thought as they rounded a corner with an open door that led into an enclosed space with an open ceiling. The doors that allowed for this were parted to the sides, wide enough for one large dropship or several small-scale shuttles. As he looked above, noticed the hues of blue and white beginning to wash over the darkened sky, with the silhouettes of ships in orbit littering their skies above. "See anything new?" said Cam as he met the side of Jay, who decreased the zoom function of his helmet as he peered up into the sky. "Barely. Just plenty of corvettes and light frigates in low orbit. It looks like the fighting died down, and it's only the fighters in the air," replied Jay as distant roars of engines and explosions filtered into the hangar. Taking a spot in a shaded corner, they rested, unknown to how much time had actually passed. It was within this time that eruptions of gunfire and explosions sounded outside. "Looks like they finally came," said Cam, and he sorted through his medical bags. "Oh, I want to join in too," moped Fields as he fidgeted with his rifle, anxious and uneasy. But the combat engagement dwindled quickly, as only their familiar gunshots reigned supreme, until eventually it fell to small pops, then finally to silence. "Damn, would have thought it was going to take longer," said Spears, with Fields agreeing wholeheartedly. "Right? I tell you, these knife ears ain't got nothing on good old Terran gunpowder. That ought to teach 'em." To think, we encounter intelligent alien life, and instead of lasers and plasma, they used bullets. Not exactly what I would hope to face when joining, added Cameron. "You said it," But let this be a lesson, replied Fields. No one knows guns better than we do. Damn shame it was only the Standard Army. I want to go against their special groups. Troops, I think they call them. I don't know. Seems dangerous. We don't know how much they differ from the regulars. They're not something I would want to go against so soon, replied Cameron. That's why we train, interjected Spears, who until now had remained quiet as he watched through the hangar's opening. It's so if or when we have to go against adversaries who know what they're doing. And in that future, Cam, you're going to need to pull the trigger. He then hung his head low at the mention, knowing that if they were attacked and he was the only one who could respond, it could have put them all in danger. I know, replied dejectedly. Just remember, we have your back. Just make sure you have ours. He offered a subtle nod before returning his eyes to their object of focus, a roar of engines that hovered above them as it slowly descended into the space. They braced against the intense wash of the engine as it forced them to take cover behind one another before assuming a lowered hum, followed by silence. It was a Hawk dropship with variable thrusters on the sides connected to a support wing that connected to the center fuselage of the craft, where the doors opened. No one exited, but instead found their hangar filled with worn and tired raiders, those of whom he now recognized as the remnants of Raptor Company's Charlie and Delta squads as seen from his HUD's overlay. As they watched, they were approached by two sergeants, identifying themselves as Blythe and Jericho. "This our ride?" spoke Blythe to Jay, who was initially caught off guard. "I wasn't aware it was for you, Sergeant," he replied, as Spears spoke into his helmet to confirm the claim. It was quick, and he motioned for them to board the ship without delay. Their departure was quick, as he sensed that they were eager to leave and took the first ride home. "Did you ask Sergeant Faith?" Jay questioned of Spears, to which he replied. "Yeah, just asked him if Raptor Company was cleared to depart. Apparently, it came from the Vice Admiral. Besides, there's another one inbound," he said, directing their attention to the following craft to take its place, empty as the first. They had expected visitors, but they never came. As they waited, the group rested on the ramp that led into the ship, before being greeted by a small unit of mud-ridden and blood-stained raiders, with two of them without their helmets. They were followed by a large fellow that looked like he could lift a tank for fun, as well as accompanied by two individuals who shared faded white strips upon their shoulders and helmet, both of whom were surrounded by veterans, as indicated by their red stripes. But before them, a man donning a sinister visage of a demon upon his helmet's visor stood before but sat quiet so as not to interrupt Fields' story. You should have seen it. Fired damn near a whole mag at a patrol, got like 10 of them before I had to reload." "Fields, that's some bullshit, and you know it. Ain't that right, Jay? Jay?" The one referred to as Jay looked in his direction, like he had seen a ghost upon their approach. "Raw, sir," said Spears as he was about to offer a salute, as did the others, but was quickly stopped from doing so. "We don't salute in the field, Raider. Attention is fine," said the officer, eyeing each one as they formed up before him, with them eyeing his worn nameplate only to find it near illegible. "New to the fleet, huh? How was your first real drop?" "Exciting, sir. Nothing quite like it," exclaimed Fields with vigor. "How is the Major treating you guys? I know he can be hard at times, but he's fair," he said. Cameron was the next to answer. "He treats us well, sir. Nice, too." "Yes, sir. The Major knows how to fight. Never saw a man tear the arm off a Celian and then beat him with it," replied Fields, clearly excited. "You guys can get going. My team has it from here. And remember, take time to decompress," he said as he boarded the Hawk. As each one entered the ramp, the four came into contact with bound Celians, wearing vestments that indicated their status. They had enough time to look upon them, but seeing how they weren't dead, told them that they may have been the officials who led all of Celia. As the ship lifted from the hangar and the ship ultimately leaving from view, it had left them with a serious case of doubt and curiosity. "Were those," began Cameron, but was interjected by Spears, who had already seemed to know their roles. "I think the war's over. To think it's been 3 years, and it took just over a day to end it on the ground." "Wait, you don't mean," started Fields. "Those must be the leaders of the Celians. Now that we have them, That means we won. He was eager and vitality from the sudden realization that the war had ended, and each participated in their own form of celebration before being silenced from a call from a familiar authority, Sergeant Faith. Spears, Cameron, Fields, Kurt, come with me. We'll get guys to cover your post. They heeded his words and left their post, with another small team taking their place no long after. They followed Faith through a series of halls that eventually led into an isolated hallway where a single soldier in gold stood by the entrance. It was Lieutenant Jacal, and his helmet was off and hung on a wall hook, a feature that they found convenient. Overall, they felt that time had moved quickly since their drop, and now they were faced with uncertainty. As they approached the lieutenant, he motioned them to stop and remove their helmets, directing their attention to the hooks. "No helmets beyond this point, gents," he ordered. The door was open, and they heard the voice of the major speaking with an individual, but it had sounded one-sided, as if he was talking to no one. But as they entered through the door as directed, they saw that the major was also without his helmet and spoke on a handheld device that he placed against his ear. "Why now? Don't we already have viable soldiers who can fill the role that have more experience? Why not pull from 3rd Battalion? They have raiders who can do what you need, to the letter. They're experienced and trained for covert ops." "Very well. I understand, ma'am. I'll notify them now," he said, relieving control of the device to Jacal, who then left the room and closed the door. Riku's expressions were one of frustration and ire, clearly from his earlier call, but none had dared to question him or speak up in general, leaving the room ultimately quiet. As he also remained standing, he then directed his authoritative gaze to the 4 soldiers before him, but spoke in a comforting and clear tone. "You boys did well today. I've even seen how you conducted yourselves out there," he began before ultimately taking a seat on a chair that could support him. "Your suit's IFF signal can show us a lot on how a raider moves in combat by recording, in proximity, enemy positions and how they disappear in relation to the raider. In short, we can deduce how well one functions in combat and use that for further training, as long as said raider survives. And you all survived." He gave a nod of approval before continuing. "But, in light of your skills to the raiders, I've gotten word of your transfers." Their expressions were now filled with confusion at the sudden mention. "Sir," replied Spears, urging the major to continue, "I don't know the exact nature of your new assignments, just that it has an emphasis on covert. I tried to keep you, but they outrank me. Your packages have been submitted already, and you'll all be transferring out of system once you get your gear from the ship," he said when Cam's hand rose, stopping him mid-sentence. "This seems sudden, sir. Is it another raider unit?" He shook his head to the sides while offering a sigh. "No, it's a new branch, and apparently they had your names up for a while. They just wanted to see if you could make your first drop and earn your stripes, which you have all earned," he replied with pride, heavy in his voice. "Gather your things and stand by for a shuttle to take you back to the ship. You'll all board the first ship to Sol." Their conversation was brief, and they had come out with more questions than answers. But as he said, a shuttle was awaiting them in the hangar. It was small, designed for light cargo and quick personnel transport. "You know what they say about the TRSC, right, Jay?" spoke Spears as they loaded into the rear ramp of the small craft. Jay knew few of the common analogies and phrases applied to the TRSC, either as rebukes or playful jokes. "Yeah, there's a ship for everything, and the TRSC has the money for all of it," he replied. "I knew you'd get it," said Spears. The doors to the ramp closed as they took their spot in one of the 6 seats that lined the compartment. It was cramped, but with enough room for Spears to walk without ducking, even if he was the tallest of them. The ship rocked mildly as it flew to its destination, with its fledgling warriors in tow. Their journey had begun, and yet their travels would take them to newer sights, beyond what they would have imagined as raiders. Jay dwelled on this as he gathered what items he had and boarded a ship that was already scheduled to head home, the TRSC Peace and Tranquility, a cruiser part of the 7th Fleet's logistics chain. When it was readied, the dive for their interstellar travel had activated, and a large swirl of blues and purples erupted, allowing for the small selecting of ships to travel beyond the Sela system, and made their way to Sol. There, their journey as a band of warriors would begin.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.